All right. Good afternoon. This is Commission President Sam Cho reconvening the regular meeting of August 8th, 2023. The time is 12:08 p.m. Apologize for being a little late today. We're meeting in person today at the Port of Seattle Headquarters Building, Commission Chambers. Deputy Clerk Payne will call the roll of commissioners in attendance today.
Thank you. First, Commissioner Cho.
Present.
Commissioner Fellman.
Present.
Commissioner Hasagawa.
Present.
And Commissioner Mohammed.
Present.
You do have a quorum.
Excellent. Thank you so much. A few housekeeping items before we begin. For everyone in the room today, please turn your cell phones to silent. For anyone participating on Microsoft Teams, please mute your speakers when not actively speaking or presenting. Please keep your cameras off unless you're a member of the Commission or Executive Director participating virtually, or you are a member of staff in a presentation or actively addressing the Commission. Members of the public addressing the Commission during the public comment may turn on their rules when their name is called to speak, and will turn them back off again at the conclusion of their remarks. For anyone at the dais here today, please turn off the speakers on any computers and silence your devices. Please also remember to address your request to be recognized to speak through the chair and to wait to speak until you have been recognized. You'll turn on your microphones on and off as needed. All of the items noted here will ensure a smoother meeting, so I thank you in advance. All votes today will be taken by roll call method so that it's clear for anyone participating virtually how votes are cast. Commissioners will say aye or nay when their name is called. We are meeting on the ancestral lands and waters of the Coast Salish people with whom we share a commitment to steward these natural resources for future generations. This meeting is being digitally recorded and may be viewed or heard at any time on the Port's website and may be rebroadcasted by King County Television. Please join me now and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first item of business today is approval of the agenda. As a reminder, if a commissioner wishes to comment for or against an item on the consent agenda, it is not necessary to pull the item. Rather, a commissioner may offer supporting or opposing comments once the motion to approve the consent agenda is on the floor and before the vote is taken. However, if a commissioner wants to ask questions of staff or wishes to have a dialogue on a consent agenda item, it is appropriate to request the item to be pulled for separate discussion. Are there any items to be pulled from the consent agenda or motions to rearrange the orders of the day? Yes, Commissioner Fellman?
Please, I'd like to just ask a question about item 8E.
8E. Okay, so we will table that one. Actually, we will go ahead and vote on it, and then you can ask your question afterwards. I'll earmark that.
I have a question on item 8C.
Okay.
I'm going to ask it afterwards.
You say 8C? Okay. Any others?
Commissioner Chip?
Yes.
I think item 8E should be pulled before the vote. The discussion should happen before the vote.
So clerk, I think we can, if we're just asking questions, do we need to pull it? Oh, you're asking questions, not just making comments.
Right.
I'd support Commissioner
Okay.
Mohammed's request to pull it instead of just asking a question, if that's what you prefer.
Okay, and then Commissioner Hasagawa, do you have questions or just comments regarding 8C?
I have a question.
Okay, so then we have a motion to move 8C and 8E. Is there a first and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Great. So the motion on the floor is to amend the consent agenda to remove 8C and 8E and vote on A, B, and D. Do I have a first and a second?
So moved.
Second?
I guess we'll take a roll call vote.
Okay. 1 second. Commissioner Fellman.
Yay?
Commissioner Hasagawa.
Aye.
Commissioner Mohammed.
Aye.
And Commissioner Cho.
Aye.
We have 4 ayes and 0 nays.
Great. So we have just approved 8A, 8B, and 8D on the consent agenda. We will now go to 8C and turn it over to Steve Metrick and Commissioner Toshiko Hasagawa for questions. But first, Steve, go ahead and introduce the item real quick.
Sorry, Commissioners, going quickly here. So item 8C?
8C, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the monthly notification of prior executive director delegation actions. And so I guess this is a non-report for this month. I guess basically it's supposed to provide transparency for the delegation of responsibility and authority that are delegated to me under the action to do that, and there were no approvals that I approved for this month of July.
Right. My only question on it was, does it need to be on consent if there's nothing
If
on here
nothing's
to
in the
approve? And this
negative
could just
report,
be on
it's a
your
negative
executive director
report.
report.
I take that, Commissioner, and we'll take a look at that. If there's nothing, then what are you voting on,
We're not
right?
active,
They're
there's no
not
action
voting.
required.
So
Right.
I think we should remove it then.
It's removed.
And do
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
And perhaps, yeah.
Yeah, so no
I don't
implications
think
for
that-
us.
yeah.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes, I think, is it okay? Okay. Yes, you can
I
just.
tried asking before the meeting and nobody had
I'm
an
sorry
answer
about
for
that,
me, so
Commissioner.
here we
No, I
are.
think that's clarified that.
All
yeah,
right, thank
so.
you.
All right, great. And then we'll move on to 8E. All right, item 8E for regarding cruise. Steve, if you want to quickly give us a synopsis, and then we'll let Commissioner Feldman ask his questions.
Should I read, I'll read into the record first, Commissioner
Yeah.
Cho. Authorization for the executive director to execute a contract for 2 new cruise passenger secondary gangways for the Smith Cove Cruise Terminal at Pier 91 in the amount of $8,700,000 of a total estimated project cost of $9 million.
Commissioners, our existing cruise passenger gangways at Terminal 91 are near the end of their useful life. Procuring 2 new gangways will improve safety, accessibility, and cruise passenger vessel embarkment and disembarkment experience. Experience. It'll also provide us with the ability to continue operations in the case of the gangway going out of service. And to answer questions, we have Marie Ellingson. I don't know if she's on virtually, and Tim Leonard, the capital project manager, and Marie. So, are you there, Tim? I see you, Tim, and I see Marie. Very good.
Excellent.
So, to
Commissioner
answer
Feldman, go
questions.
ahead and ask your questions.
Well, actually, Commissioner Mohammed wanted this item pulled, so do you want to go first? I just had a question about, so really mostly about the accounting for it, but I guess I'm drawing my attention down here. First of all, does 66 have 2 gangways?
Yes, it does.
Okay, and it seems to me, certainly with the larger ships, it only makes sense, and you say that this provides increased actually flexibility for the shore power, which is a separate item for being able to access ships of different sizes and stuff. What my question had to do with was that it says this project will be funded by the general fund, whereas the item with the shore power, which I kind of thought these would be presented together, says it's from like the cruise budget. And this is just something I bring up all the time, in that just, cruises are brightest light in the maritime budget. But those things that are associated with operations versus capital are kept apart. So when I keep on asking it, what is the net profitability of cruise at the end of the year? These sort of investments are not part of that calculation. It's a lucrative revenue generator, but it costs money to make money. And so I just think that the net result should be presented as the nature of the cruise. Now, clearly, we have lease obligations to maintain our berths, fendering and things like that is part of that. Increasing the capacity to handle additional gangways, stuff like this, to me, would be seen as, while important, potentially something we would share with the cruise operator. And if we're just going to absorb it, then I just am talking about how it would be accounted for.
Is there a
So
question?
Commissioner, I understand that Kelly Zupan just came to the chambers there, and I think he was going to address this question.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Kelly, do you want to join us? But let me just say, in general, Commissioner, that, as we look at, I hear your question is more about how do you account for it, to reflect on it, and I think Kelly can talk about that as we roll them in. I mean, we don't have separate funds to pay for separate items, but I'll let Kelly address that.
Yes, Commissioner, we typically account for it in the depreciation line. And we look at that, when we go through the budget with you, we look at that overall as well. We don't look at it as much on the year-to-date numbers because, especially with cruise, because the revenue is very cyclical. I mean, it hits mostly in July and August, but we do have that in the budget numbers, and we look at it that way. And it still clears profit, even including the depreciation costs, but obviously there's a big chunk of it. I don't have that number right offhand, but we do have that. And when we go through the budget presentation with you in October, we will display it as the overall, for all of the business lines, we will display that overall profitability for you as well.
I guess that was my question, doesn't how it's broken down by business line. Because, we do things like we increase the water main, we do other things to accommodate this burgeoning business. I'm just saying at the end of the day, for that given year, there's revenue and there's expense. And I rarely see this represented as the net profitability of cruise. Yes. So if it's amortized, it's depreciated, whatever, if it's a $9 million project over a 20-year period of time, we can knock off whatever, $450,000, whatever it is, per year as an expense towards the net revenue.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I don't understand the question of when you want us to show this. We do it, like I said, every year during the budget season. We talk about.
Yeah, let me jump in, Commissioner. We can actually do that kind of roll-up for top. What I hear is not just on this one, but in general, right, of all those things. What are
As
they
we, for
additive?
each business line, because
Yeah, well-
it's characterized differently for the shore power. And so it says specifically for shore power, cruise line business. And so, at the end of the year, we said, we had an additional $4 million or something from cruise to go into workforce development, which is a good thing. But to be able to say that came from cruise, that means that we understand what the expenses, other expenses from cruise were, to know what the delta was that we,
Yeah.
Because to me, we should be reinvesting cruise into cruise first, right? So those expenses should be covering, those revenues should be covering the maintenance and operation of cruise. Anything left over from that, it's like a general fund kind of a question.
And that's in general. Well, I think going back to that one specific case, I think we were looking at during the actual budget, we were executing that as a significant, probably wouldn't return to that all the time, but I think that was a specific case. But I hear your question about that, reflecting what those, it's the cash flow of what it comes out to and how the expenses against those individual things. So we can cover that in the budget briefing when we go forward.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks, Kai. I appreciate you coming up answering those questions. I went a little out of order here. We're actually going to vote on the consent agenda later in the agenda. Right now, the question is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Great.
Second, I thought we did that.
Yeah, I thought so too. The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any objection to the approval of the agenda as amended? Hearing none, the agenda is approved as amended. We have no special orders for today, so then we'll move on to the Executive Director's report. Executive Director Metric.
No additional questions, but we're going to go back to it.
Yeah, consent is after public comment, so we'll come back to consent agenda afterwards. Sorry, that was my fault.
Commissioners, good afternoon. I hope everyone had a great weekend and that you were able to enjoy at least some of the Seafair and Seattle Fleet Week last week. If you just give me a moment of privilege, I just want to reflect, because actually this August 4th, last Friday, was meaningful for me because it was 45 years ago on last Friday where I was on a vessel docked at Pier 70 45 years ago last Friday on August 4th. So I was 5 years old, and I don't know how they got me in the Coast Guard then. But anyway, but I was just looking back there, but it just came full circle for me last Friday, looking at that when we had the archive of where ships were docked at that time. and reflecting back on that time only 45 years ago, and coming full circle here. As I've said before, an honor to be here at the Port of Seattle to do that. So, and just thanks for that, just a moment of reflection on that. And last week's celebration, it also was reminding me of Fleet Week, and the Seafair celebration included a number of port-related highlights here at the port. The parade of naval and Coast Guard vessels from the U.S. and Canada was enjoyed by hundreds from Pier 62 viewpoint and included a U.S. Coast Guard search and rescue demonstration featuring a helicopter water rescue, which I'm sure was much better than the Blue Angels. So let me just say that. And then a naturalization ceremony for 21 citizenship candidates at Pier 66, where Commissioner Cho provided some inspirational words, along with Rear Admiral Fossey, the newly installed Coast Guard District 13 commander. And then Commissioner Calkins also joined the students from Aviation High School and the Blue Angels at Boeing Field also last week. And for the first time, the fleet gathered at Terminal 46 to welcome the general public. In fact, nearly 4,600 community members had the opportunity to meet sailors, tour the vessels, and also see exhibits, including the ILWU, I believe, had an exhibit there along on 46, along with other programs. And my special thanks to the Northwest Seaport Alliance for their collaboration on this effort, and to everyone on our team that worked to make these events happen. And as many of you know, Commissioner, Seattle is also in the midst of hosting the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Senior Officials and Ministerial Meetings. APEC is a regional economic forum established in 1989 to leverage the growing interdependence of the Asia-Pacific region. APEC's 21 member economies, including the United States, aim to create greater prosperity for the people of the region by promoting balanced, inclusive, sustainable, innovative, and secure growth, as well as by accelerating regional economic integration. As the Trans-Pacific Gateway for people and goods, the Port of Seattle is particularly attuned to the importance of these relationships, and so we're excited to be playing a major role in hosting this year's meetings, from facilitating international arrivals at SEA for visiting foreign dignitaries, to speaking on panels, to hosting major reception and events at Pier 69. We are deeply engaged in both the content and the logistics of making the ministerials a success. And a huge thank you to Karen Zog-Black for her tireless work in coordinating these activities at SEA, the comings and goings, and actually the events themselves on our behalf, and to the huge team of port employees and partners who are supporting her in these efforts. Finally, I want to mention that I was pleased to join Commissioner Cho, Commissioner Calkins, and Aviation Managing Director Lance Little last week at the Board of Directors meeting for Alaska Air Group, the parent company of Alaska Airlines and Horizon Airlines. We've had an opportunity to meet with the board in the past, which is an important opportunity for collaboration and coordination with Seattle's hometown airline. This year's meeting was particularly timely, given that the Alaska board has identified SEA modernization as one of their most important strategic corporate priorities. We are already collaborating with them on major capital projects like the North Main Terminal Modernization Project, also known as the SEA Gateway, and we have many shared priorities on topics like sustainability, safety, anti-human trafficking, and workforce development. Commissioners Cho and Calkins also had the chance to highlight some of the major non-aviation activities going on at the port. Overall, it was a very productive conversation on topics big and small, and it was exciting to hear about Alaska's priorities. I look forward to ongoing conversations with all of our tenants and partners about continuing to improve our facilities and the customer experience at SEA. Moving to today's commission meeting, I'd like to highlight a few items. On the consent agenda is an action that will maximize the flexibility of airplane gates to accommodate increased air travel demand and anticipated gate outages caused by other major construction projects. We're also asking for approval for the purchase of new cruise gangways, which are essential to our operational continuity and flexibility. On our action agenda today, we have several actions related to maritime, including additional actions to increase the use of shore power for crews at Terminal 91, the redevelopment of commercial fishing facilities at Piers 6 and 8 at Terminal 91, and construction of our Maritime Innovation Center. We'll close our meeting with the second quarter 2023 financial performance briefing, which I know that all of you are looking forward to. Commissioners, this concludes my remarks.
Okay, thank you very much. And I will also want to give a shout out to Karen Zog-Black for all the great work she's doing for APEC. It's not an easy lift. All right, so I understand that there are no committee reports today, so we will go ahead and move on in the agenda. We are now at the public comment section of our agenda. The Port Commission welcomes public comment as an important part of the public process. Comments are received and considered by Commission in its deliberations. Before we take public comment, let's review our rules for in-person and virtual public comment. Deputy Clerk Payne, please play the recorded rules.
You may need to reshare with sound, Mary Cruz.
You're gonna have to read it.
It's not on my script.
The Port of Seattle Commission welcomes you to our meeting today. As noted, public comment is an important part of the public process, and the Port of Seattle Commission thanks you for joining us. The Commission accepts in-person, virtual, and written public comment regarding matters related to the conduct of port business. Before we proceed, here are the Commission's public comment rules of procedure for your information. Each commenter will have 2 minutes to speak and should stay within the allotted time. A timer will appear on the screen and a buzzer will sound at the end of the 2-minute period for each speaker. The Commission reserves the right to receive comments specifically related to the conduct of port business. If comments are not related to the conduct of port business, the presiding officer will stop the speaker and ask that comments be kept to matters related to the conduct of port business. This rule applies to both introductory and concluding remarks. All remarks should be addressed to the Commission as a body and not to individual commissioners. Disruptions of Commission public meetings are prohibited. Disruptions include, but are not limited to, the following: refusal of a speaker to limit remarks to topics related to the conduct of port business, threats and abusive or harassing behavior and language, obscene language and gestures, refusal of a speaker to comply with the allotted time set for the individual speaker's public comment, leaving the podium or testimony table to physically approach commissioners or staff during one's public comment, provided speakers may author written materials to the Commission clerk, and any behavior that disrupts, disturbs, or otherwise impedes the meeting. Any disruption will result in a speaker's microphone being immediately shut off by the presiding officer, and a warning or loss of speaking privileges or removal from the meeting room may occur, as provided in the Commission's bylaws. Written materials provided to the clerk will be included in today's meeting record. The clerk has a list of those prepared to speak. We are taking comments from anyone who has signed up to speak virtually, as well as from anyone who has joined us today here in the meeting room. When your name is called, if you are joining virtually, please unmute yourself, then please repeat your name for the record and state your topic related to the conduct of port business. You may turn on your camera at this time. The 2-minute timer will then begin. If you're on the Teams meeting and at the same time streaming the meeting on the website, please mute the website stream to avoid feedback. When you have concluded your remarks, you may again turn off your camera and mute your speaker. If you are speaking from the meeting room, please come to the testimony table, repeat your name for the record, and state your topic related to the conduct of port business. Our public comment period will now commence. Thank you again for joining us today.
All right, thank you, Ms. Clerk Hart. A reminder that even when she's not here, she's always with us. We will start with our first in-person. I'm going to do my usual rotating between in-person and virtual comments. Our first in-person is Alex Zimmerman.
Thank you.
Please state your name and the topic related to port conduct, and then we'll start the clock.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Alex Zimmerman.
We'll start after you say your name and state your topic.
My name is Alex Zimmerman, and I live in Belleville for 35 years. I come come today for a particular reason, because I see chair discriminate me and hate me because I'm Jew, and he support Iranian Muslim candidate in Bellevue, what is my competitor. So this is exactly what has happened, and I will be complaining about this to police.
Alex, this is going to be your first warning. You're not allowed to make references to political campaigns or activities related to your campaign.
This is a hate crime, and I will be complain to police now. This is exactly what is I want delivery to you, because it's too much. What is Democrat mafia doing with somebody who go against her candidate? You understand about talking? You can cut me or you don't cut. There's nothing changed. I will complain about you, crime, hate crime, anti-Semitism.
Alex, you're not allowed to make direct comments to commissioners. Please refer to the body of the commission and not individual commissioners. That's your second warning.
So this is a hate crime. I will complain to police now. And I'm doing this before too many Democrat mafia. Yeah, don't thinking about this. I go to police now, and this hate crime is a felony right now. It's exactly what is will be happening. Yeah, bye, my friend.
Thank you. Moving on in public comment, we're going to go virtual. Rebecca Lavelle, are you with us? I think she's virtual. Rebecca? Okay, we'll move on to the next virtual commentator and come back to Rebecca. Abigail Belknap? Abigail, can you hear me?
Hi there, yes, can you hear me okay?
Oh, there you go. Yep. Hi, Abigail. Go ahead and restate your full name and the topic related to port business, and we'll start the clock.
Yes, my name is Abigail Belknap, and topic today, I'm just commenting on behalf of Copperworks Distilling Company located on the waterfront. I am the marketing manager for this company, and this is just a comment in support of the cruise industry here in Seattle. As I mentioned, we're on the waterfront. We're right across from Miners Landing. We get a lot of traffic in summertime. This is our peak season, and we get a major influx of tourists who are, so we're very happy to see, all the traffic that the cruises bring to the waterfront and to a small business like ours. We have not exactly structured some business decisions around it, but it has influenced our thinking and how we can best accommodate that traffic to our tasting room. In a few different days, we've noticed these folks coming in early from the cruises, and they're waiting outside our door before we are officially open so that they can come in and enjoy tasting with us. So we had thought about adjusting our business hours to accommodate that. We had planned to do this anyways because we've needed to beef up staffing for a while, but we have added another full-time position to our tasting room on the waterfront to help with that as well. And it's really wonderful. We see folks all over the country, thanks to the cruise industry, bringing in the waterfront. And these are folks that normally we would never have a chance to meet and have not really interacted with our business and our brand beforehand. So appreciate that helpful push for our small business. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abigail. Moving back in person, we have Harold Uglas.
Hello, my name is Harold Uglas. I'm president of ILW Local 19 here in the Port of Seattle. We represent the workers that work on the cruise ships and the container ships, grain ships, everything here. I want to thank Executive Director Metric and the commissioners allowing me to speak. Speaking on behalf of the support for the cruise industry, it has been a very good job for our membership. We appreciate the chance to work together with the different vendors, and that's why we're kind of excited about this new cold ironing that's going to come in place. Watts Electric, we look forward to working with them. Hopefully we'll be able to get 100% compliance of plugging in every ship. We've had a history over the last 10, 12 years of being able to plug in. Hopefully we can make that 100%, along with what's going on with the Seaport Alliance. We greatly appreciate that. Also, on the second gangway, we know it's vital to have that, because as these ships get bigger and bigger, sometimes we're moving off of 5,000 passengers on and off a vessel, and they turn these ships over within one shift. And I know it's very important 66 has been doing the 2 gangway operation, and so we look forward to that. And we also applaud the cruise ship industry and the port's directive to try to bring in green initiatives. I think it's very important because we're not only important to have jobs, we have to take care of the Puget Sound and Alaska, and we got to speak up for the other people who don't have a chance to. And so we want to represent everybody, and just want to say thanks again. We support the cruise industry, we support the green initiative, and we especially support that we work together, the ILW, the port commissions, and all the vendors, and make sure this happens. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Harold, for those comments and the commentary. We're moving back virtually to Joshua Berger. Joshua, you with us?
Hi, good afternoon. You can hear me okay?
Can hear you great. Please state your name and your
Great.
topic. Go ahead.
Yeah, Joshua Berger, here in enthusiastic support of the full authorization renovation of the Seattle Ship Supply Building. I am the president and CEO of Washington Maritime Blue. We are the nonprofit organization, innovation cluster organization, intending to be the prime tenant and operator of the proposed Maritime Innovation Center. It's been quite a journey to get to this point. Since 2016, we've joined forces to envision, design, and implement the organization, programming, and ecosystem to become a global leader in maritime, oceans, and fisheries innovation for a sustainable and equitable blue economy. In the last 4 years, we've delivered a nationally and now globally renowned accelerator program. We've run the first ever international accelerator, attracting the best of the best across the globe to Seattle. And we're about to launch the new Seattle Maritime Blue Incubator. And we do all this now at the Blue Hub, currently located in the second floor of the Fisherman's Center building overlooking the terminal. We lease 6,000 square feet where we operate a collaborative workspace with subtenants, host events, run programming for startups, students, members, and partners, as well as host high-level government officials and business delegations from around the world, and generally foster collaboration in all things maritime, oceans, and fisheries. We're now ready to scale this work into the new Maritime Innovation Center and fully leverage its 20,000 square feet to achieve our shared mission. We've worked closely with port staff through the design process. We've engaged architects on design and planning the tenant improvements on top of the core and shell, and are currently negotiating a lease for long-term tenancy and operations. In this new living building restoration, a first of its kind in the world, we're going to be able to tell the remarkable story of the legacy industrial sector, its history, alongside the story of innovation, resilience, and inclusion. It will be a beautiful and attractive in multiple senses of the word, and a beacon for the natural evolution of our work on, near, and for the water. So I kindly ask for a full vote of authorization of funds, and I'm thrilled to take this next step together. I really thank you all for your leadership, your investment, and commitment to this region's continued growth as the center of excellence for innovation, sustainability, and equity in the blue economy.
Great. Thank you, Joshua. Next in person is going to be Gerard Wirtz. Good to see you. If you could state your name and your topic.
Good afternoon. My name is Gerard Wirtz, and the subject is economic impact of the cruise business along the waterfront.
Is your mic on?
I believe so.
Is it on? No, I'm asking if he has turned it on.
You can't hear me?
No, I haven't touched this at all. There we go.
Bob Donegan was not able to be here personally today, and so he asked me to come. He's left a letter that I'll leave with the commission clerk for each of you, and it really goes to the heart of what sort of benefit the cruise industry is providing for Seattle businesses along the waterfront. The Seattle Historic Waterfront Association consists primarily of the businesses between Coleman Dock and Pier 70. And I know those businesses just as I know many of you do, and they're overwhelmingly local. There's a lot of family businesses. And the message, today is that we heard also from Abigail is the importance of the cruise business for these local merchants. More than half of the business of these companies comes in during the summer. You can talk to a lot of the managers in the restaurants and the hotels, and they can practically tell you how many ships are in port just based on how many people are here. And to echo something that Abigail said earlier, the cruise visitors to Seattle bring so much to our community. You know, they're here maybe visiting family or friends who live here, or maybe it's the first time they're in the city, and they have the opportunity to become ambassadors for us. So we really want to put our best foot forward on the waterfront, and the cruise ship visitors, which were absent during the pandemic. It's great to have them back. There's some numbers in the letter, but we hope to reach 2019 levels again in terms of number of visitors along the waterfront, approximately 6 million. So thank you. We thank you for your service and for your work to bring these people to Seattle, and we support the continuation in a green and sustainable way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, and then Amy Solon is next. Amy? Hey, Amy, can you state your full name and your topic, and then we'll start the clock for you.
Yes, I am Amy Salin, Director of the Burke Center for Entrepreneurship at the University of Washington, and I am speaking in support of the Maritime Innovation Center project. I believe the center will provide the opportunity for the maritime industry and programs such as the Maritime Blue Innovation Accelerator, as Joshua mentioned, to really leverage the entrepreneurial and business communities around the Pacific Northwest. In particular, it can be a base where anyone engaged with the space can leverage collaborations with the University of Washington, which is a key partner in translational innovation activities. For example, the Foster School of Business and the Burke Center for Entrepreneurship, colleges of engineering and the environment, fishery science, computer science, Clean Energy Institute, CoMotion, which is UW's technology licensing office, Earth Lab, just to name a few. With continued collaboration between the port and the UW, the Maritime Innovation Center can provide essential resources to continue all of this entrepreneurial education, mentoring, networking for new business developing in the maritime technology sector, co-working and a makerspace for maritime professionals to collaborate with student and faculty innovators. So as I stated in my letter support that you have, I strongly believe this facility will become a key driver to spur new technologies in the maritime industry and our region. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then we have one last speaker. We'll circle back. Rebecca from GSP is on the line, and I see here she's right there. If you could state your name and the topic, and then we'll give you 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you so much. Good afternoon. Rebecca Lovell, the Chief Operating Officer of Greater Seattle Partners. We are a nonprofit, public and private partnership dedicated to economic development and to a dynamic and resilient economy. And I am here today, again, like Amy and Josh before me, to enthusiastically offer support on behalf of GSP for the full authorization of funds to support the Maritime Innovation Center. Just a few comments on why this is such a meaningful investment for our region and our workforce. The convergence of maritime fisheries, green economy, and technology is like none other around the world. And having personally led incubators and accelerators for the last 15 years, I can attest that there is nothing like the magic of in-person collaboration when it comes to inspiring the next generation of our workforce and ensuring that innovation continues to thrive and flourish here in our region. Everything from the accelerator itself, which Josh has ably led and supported for a number of years, to co-working space. As Amy mentioned, there is something truly serendipitous that happens when you have people working together, and engineering serendipity in a physical space like this is a really smart investment for all of us as a region. Everything about this investment speaks to our values of inclusive workforce development, of a sustainable economy, everything, from the building itself to the innovations that can happen within. We can't be more enthusiastic about voicing our support and urge this body to vote for full authorization of funds. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. I believe that concludes all of our public comments. Clerk, could you please summarize any comments that may have been submitted or written to us, as well as a summary?
Do you
of
want to
today's-
call if there's anyone else on the line or in the room?
Sure. Is there anyone else on the line who wishes to speak, or in the room who wishes to speak? All right, seeing none, clerk, go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Commission President, members of the Commission, Executive Director Metric. We have received 54 written comments prior to our meeting today. These have been distributed to you in advance of the meeting and will become a part of the meeting record, of the public record. 43 submissions today come from citizens who write to ask the Port Commission to cap the number of 2024 season sailings and passengers at or below 2019 levels, reducing these numbers every year until the industry no longer pollutes the oceans and air and no longer emits climate-changing greenhouse gas emissions. The names of the citizens are listed on each of the written comments and will also be added to the meeting minutes. Noemi Maxwell, Allison Osterer, Tariq Fayed, Julia Buck, Jim Bernthal, Jacqueline Casey, and Sandy Hunt all write to thank commissioners and port staff for the recent actions to protect North Sea-Tac Park, requests adequate time for public comment on Order 2023-10 before it is finalized in the fall, and calls attention to recent Seattle Times reporting of the rapid loss of trees to development in the Seattle area. Barbara McMichael writes to thank the Port Commission on the creation of Order 2023-10, but is concerned over the environmental impacts of the airport on her community and the preservation of all forested lands that remain. Iris Antman writes regarding the harms of cruising and the climate crisis. She also asks for clarification on the public comment process and input plan for Order 2023-10. Ramsey Cookman writes in support of the preservation of North Sea-Tac Park and concerns over the amount of development and shrinking green space in their area. Amy Sallin has submitted a letter of support for the Port of Seattle's Maritime Innovation Center project that also supports her spoken testimony. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that synopsis. Yes, Commissioner Hasegawa.
Can you please repeat the name of the person who wrote in requesting for clarification on the process for the input on the tree order?
Yes, there are several. Noe B. Maxwell, Allison Osterer, Tariq Fayed, Julia Buck, Jim Bernthal, Jacqueline Casey, Sandy Hunt, and Iris Antman.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Hearing no further public testimony, we'll move on to the consent agenda. We'll go back. Items on the consent agenda are considered routine and will be adopted by one motion. Items removed from the consent agenda will be considered separately immediately after the adoption of the remaining consent agenda items. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda items covering items 8A, 8B, and 8D.
So moved.
Second.
Great. The motion was made and seconded. Commissioners, please say aye or nay when your name is called for an approval of the consent agenda.
Thank you. Commissioner Fellman?
Aye.
Commissioner Hasegawa?
Aye.
Commissioner Mohammed?
Aye.
And Commissioner Cho?
Aye.
There are 4 ayes and 0 nays for this item.
Great. The motion passes. We will now go back to item 8E on the consent agenda. I apologize, Commissioner Mohammed. Please, the floor is yours for questions.
Yeah, I just thank you for the time. I just wanted someone to be able to answer for the benefit of the public. If someone could explain just the urgency of this investment and if there are any public safety concerns at this time. I know that the gangway is at its service lifetime. Are there any damages to it at this moment? Are there any safety concerns?
Thank you, Commissioner. There are no current damages or safety concerns. Where we would benefit by increased safety is to make sure that we're offering gangways that match the capacities on the ships so that we're not trying to fit too many people through any one particular gangway. Also, the current secondary gangway on the east side is not ADA compliant, so this would give us a backup option that is ADA compliant. And we don't currently have a secondary gangway on the west side, so that gives us that occupancy as well.
Great, that concludes my
Hopefully
questions. That's sufficient.
Thank you.
Excellent. Commissioner Hasegawa?
So the original amount of this project was supposed to be $300,000 and it's jumped up to $900,000 to $9 million, correct?
Would you like me to respond to that, Marie?
That would be great. Thanks, Tim.
Okay. Commissioner, good afternoon. I'm Tim Leonard, project manager for this with Waterfront Project Management. We actually have an initial $300,000 budget that was authorized through the cruise business group, essentially to enable us to start moving forward on the necessary actions or activities on this project, such as we procured the services of a technical consultant who has been working with port staff as well as Cruise Terminals of America and SSA, and we're in the process right now of determining the best option for the secondary gangways as well as the requirements that need to be included in the request for proposal that we'll be advertising along with our contracts procurement office. So
Okay, thank you.
hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you. And so we currently have the West Gangway, the West Gangway and the East Gangway, and the East Gangway has a secondary gangway, which is at the end of service life. So this
Correct.
So this request is looking for, first and foremost, to be able to make improvements or to fully replace the existing secondary east gangway, correct? And that's a
Correct.
maintenance
We-
level.
Fully replace it.
That's a maintenance level request.
We are looking to procure 2 new secondary gangways, which will replace the existing single secondary gangway. And this will enable us to, in addition to the primary gangways, which are not involved here, they're in operation, we're going to have a new secondary gangway at the east berth, and then this will enable us to have a secondary gangway at the west berth as well.
Which would
So
be
essentially
brand new.
2 new secondary gangways to replace an existing single secondary gangway.
Okay, so it's not just, replacing what, I'm looking at the alternatives that you presented to us. Alternative 1, do nothing. Alternative 2, do something but later. Alternative 3, procure 2 new cruise passenger secondary gateways. And I'm wondering what the thought was or the process was behind, potentially an alternative 4, where you act on replacing the dilapidated or end-of-life secondary east gangway, and then immediately, and then at a later date, add the additional capacity at the west gangway. What's the time urgency associated with doing both now?
So actually, as I understand it, there were 2 secondary gangways at one point in operation. One is no longer in service due to maintenance issues. And actually, the existing secondary gangway at the east berth is comprised of parts from that gangway as well as others. And in effect, it has been assembled based on parts from multiple gangways. So the need is really 2 secondary gangways. This has existed and it needs to be addressed at both berths. So to just replace the existing east berth secondary gangway would only address a part of the problem. It's really, the need is for a secondary gangway in addition to a primary gangway at both berths.
I still feel like I don't have clarity on what, I understand needing to accommodate capacity because demand has been at an all-time high, but are there safety issues associated with meeting capacity needs? And then, what are the implications for the workforce conditions associated with that as well?
So the safety aspect would be from the standpoint of meeting or being compliant with ADA requirements. As has been stated, the trend in the cruise industry, as you're well aware, I'm sure, is that the vessels are getting larger. So the need for a greater vertical range as well as horizontal range to connect with the necessary or the actual ships that are berthing at those at the 2 berths is increasing. So right now, that secondary berth that's in operation, secondary gangway on the east berth that's in operation is not ADA compliant. So if the primary gangway were to go down and we were utilizing the secondary gangway as a backup, an emergency backup, we're limited in meeting ADA compliance. So we're looking to achieve full ADA compliance between the primary and the secondary gangways, as well as meet the growing capacity needs and the mobility needs the secondary gangway that's currently in place needs to be assembled and disassembled when it's utilized, and the mobility of the footprint it's taking up on the apron and the ability to move that around on the apron to accommodate other needs in conjunction with operations is very limited. So I guess you could say from a safety standpoint also, in providing the most efficient operations on the apron is another thing that we're looking to achieve as part of these new gangways that we're looking to procure.
And then in our briefing here, it says that adding a secondary gangway on the west side would create additional flexibility for shore power connections. How does that work?
Correct. So as will be presented as part of that action item, the new shore power equipment is more mobile. These new gangways will be more mobile in order to work in conjunction with that new shore power equipment, as far as the operations on the apron. So again, the existing gangway, the secondary gangway I have is stationary, and it's basically locked into place. So your ability to flexibility in conjunction with the varying size vessels that are berthed at the cruise terminal is limited currently. So the new gangways will be more mobile in conjunction with that new shore power equipment.
Commissioner Fallon.
So to be clear, this is for embarkation and disembarkation?
Correct.
And
That's
so,
correct.
so just in terms of getting people on and off the vessel quickly, I think that's an important feature. ADA is obviously very, very important feature, but in an emergency, to get people off the vessel if there's any problem on board in a speedily fashion. So it seems like to me there's clearly value in doing this. I think one of the questions I just had is in terms of you want to have this operational by 2025. So are construction going to occur during the 2024 season, or you can try to accommodate all that in the off season?
That's correct. So we're looking to have the new gangways in place for service at the start of the 2025 cruise season. These gangways will be assembled by a manufacturer. The primary gangways right now are overseas. We may have a vendor, depending on the procurement, the responses to the request for proposal. We may have one within the U.S. That remains to be seen. But the point being is that we're looking to execute a contract with a vendor to manufacture and deliver the gangways, and then they'll be assembled and commissioned at T91. So the construction really takes place offsite, but we're looking to have them in place by the start of the 2025 cruise season, ideally.
So you don't anticipate any impact on the operations in 2025 other than in 2024, other than achieving the benefits in 2025?
Correct.
And just last thing, so did the previous gangways live up to their duration? Did you get what you expected to get out of them? Did they survive the lifespan you expected them to?
The prior secondary gangways?
Yeah. I mean, did they get their useful life?
I believe so. And Maria, you're more familiar with the history, so I'll let you speak.
Sure. Yeah, they basically were parts of other gangways, Frankenstein, if you will. So like the current secondary gangway on the east side is actually pieces of different gangways, including Terminal 30. So yeah, I think we got good life out of pieces of them, for sure.
And we didn't use that in our advertising, Franken Terminal.
All right, moving on.
All right, sorry.
Can I get a motion on AE, please?
So moved.
Second.
Great. Can we roll call a vote for AE, please?
Yes, first you have Commissioner Fellman,
Aye.
Commissioner Asagawa,
Aye.
Commissioner Mohammed,
Aye.
and Commissioner Cho.
Aye.
4 ayes and 0 nays for this item.
Excellent. Thank you. The motion passes. Moving on in the
Thank
agenda,
you.
we have 5 new business items today. Deputy Clerk Payne, please read the item into the record, and then Executive Director Merschuk will then introduce the item.
Thank you. Beginning with item 10B, Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission briefing.
Yeah.
Commissioners, the Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission the CACC, was created by the state legislature in 2019, has been tasked with recommending a single preferred location for a new commercial service airport by June 15th, 2023. The Port of Seattle served on the, I don't know if we're calling it CACC or is it, what's it? It's
CACC.
CACC.
Affectionately known as
I'm sure
CACC,
I don't know.
yes.
CACC. Served on the CACC in a technical advisory committee. In 2023, the state legislature voted to shift the CACC to a new commercial aviation work group. However, the CACC's final report to the state legislature contains valuable information about the future of regional airport capacity that has significant bearing on our plans at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport as we develop our own infrastructure. Today's presentation will summarize the history, process, findings, and next step from the CACC's final report. And our presenters are R.F. Gauss, Aviation Chief Operating Officer, and Warren Hendrickson, Chair, Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission, the CACC. So I'll turn it over to R.F. first.
Thank you, Commissioners and Executive Director. As stated, and for the record, I'm R.F. Gauss, Chief Operating Officer at Sea-Tac Airport, and I'm pleased to be here today to introduce today's topic, the Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission, and as just stated, affectionately known as CACC, and that's how I'll refer to it for the rest of my comments. And our speaker, CACC Chair, Warren Hendrickson. I had a pleasure to personally serve on the CACC, and I want to start by publicly thanking Warren for his steady, thoughtful, and dedicated leadership on his very challenging and controversial process. As you probably saw in the news over the past year, this has often felt like a thankless job, and there was significant community resistance to some of CACC's findings. We were very fortunate to have someone of Warren's background on the CACC. To name a few of his accomplishments, he was an instructor pilot in the U.S. Air Force, a commercial air transport pilot, and starting from the smallest to the largest, rated on the 737, the 757, the 767, the 777, and the iconic 747. He was also a fleet manager for the Boeing 747, executive director for WAMA, which is a Washington Airports Management Association, and has had roles at two Washington ports, Bremerton and Olympia, currently serving as acting director of operations for Olympia Regional Airport. To state the obvious, the work of the CACC is linked to the future of our airport, Sea-Tac. We know that we cannot accommodate all future projected passenger demand through our facility, and that is why the Port Commission several years ago formally endorsed the state process for identifying additional regional airport capacity. While we are doing our best to build our SCA, investing currently $4.6 billion, that was approved by the Commission, on an annual basis as we go through the financial approval process for conducting, to improve our infrastructure and conducting an environmental review for future enhancements. However, we do rely on the state and others to figure out how to address the future of our region's transportation system, whether it be expansion of existing regional airports or a brand new airport in Washington State, or high-speed rail, urban air mobility, or a combination of all of them. The state legislators sunset the CACC this year, but their findings are still important to hear as we think about our own future plans and our engagement with other regional stakeholders. And so I look forward to hearing Warren's remarks, and I know he will be pleased to answer any questions that you have about the CACC's process, findings, and suggested next steps. So with that, let me turn things over to Warren to go through his slides. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Good afternoon, Executive Director Metric and Arif. Thank you for that kind introduction. There's a lot of words to explain that apparently I can't hold a job over the length of my career. So I've had a great number of aviation adventures, and I'm thrilled to be here. My role with the Port of Olympia and serving both as Airport Senior Manager and Acting Director of Operations has no connection at all to the CACC, to the Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission. I came to the CACC as a commission member, non-voting member, as a result of my role and appointed delegate as the Washington State Aviation Alliance representative to the CACC. That is an organization of all the general aviation organizations in the state dedicated to legislative advocacy on behalf of general aviation. So that's how I came to join the CACC from there. It has been a very interesting, challenging, rewarding process over the past 4 years. I will say that if anybody thought this would be a great way to get your 15 minutes of fame, I would not recommend it. So In any case, let me tell you a little bit of the story about where we've been, where we are, and where we need to go from the position of commercial aviation capacity in the future. Next slide, please. So our background, we've been at this for over 4 years, identified by the state legislature and created at that time in 2019. We stood up, we thought it was going to be a 2-year effort, and it was extended to twice that duration as a result of the pandemic. That turned out to be a blessing and a curse all at the same time, but it also provided us additional time to go ahead and deliberate and make some recommendations. The goal, as was amended over time as a result of the pandemic, was to identify a single preferred location for a new commercial aviation facility, whether that be a new airport or using an existing airport, by June 15th of this year. The membership was comprised of 27 total members, 15 voting, and 12 non-voting. It would be the 15 voting members by a 60% majority that would then make the final recommendation in each place. But we took the role as commission members that everybody had an equal seat at the table and everyone was a participant at equal level. Only when we came to actual votes did we actually make a determination between voting and non-voting in terms of roles. I will have to say it was incredible to have a seat at the table with this group of 27. They were the right people for the right task, critical thinkers, statewide representatives, industry, government, airport, aviation, strong thinkers, community advocates. And WASDI Aviation did an absolutely superlative role with minimal resources in providing administrative support. Next slide. So the process was to provide recommendations to solve the shortage of capacity, not in terms of just commercial air passenger service, but also air cargo and general aviation. There were 3 phased deadlines: January 22, October 22, and then June of this year. The funding made available to the CAC was limited to public outreach and administrative purposes only. That's an important point. We had no specific funding for research and analysis, and that was a significant constraint placed upon the Commission's work that we had to be creative to work around. Next slide. The recommendations also included a couple of restrictions that were placed by the original legislation on the CAC's work. First, recommendations could not include those located in a county with a population of 2 million or more. There's only one county in the state with a population that high, that would be King County. Options also for a new commercial aviation facility could not include siting on a facility of a military installation that would either be incompatible or affect its ability to carry out its mission requirements. Next slide. Essentially, that meant we could not touch King County, we could not touch JBLM. Initially, there was conversation about, is there a role that JBLM could play by commission members in terms of a joint use civil-military field? There are examples of that elsewhere in the country. Charleston, South Carolina, probably the most notable example. There are others. But the end result was we quickly realized that we could not even venture into that conversation based upon the way the legislation was written. Next slide. We have not embarked on this journey just recently. There's a long history. Going back to 1992, the flight plan study came out with 3 recommendations. The first recommendation was build a 3rd runway at Sea-Tac. Check. We've done that. The second recommendation was to initiate commercial service at Payne Field. Check. We've done that. And the 3rd recommendation was to construct a new airport in South Puget Sound. And here we are 31 years later. And we are still at the table discussing the need to address aviation capacity. More recently, the FAA began to realize, and Executive Director Metrick just talked even just previously about attending Alaska Air Group's board meeting where capacity, North Terminal expansion, certainly this was an issue. The FAA saw the impact of Sea-Tac and its ability to handle commercial aviation traffic moving forward over the next several decades and realized that we need to figure out when this capacity is going to hit the wall and what we can do about it. So they commissioned the Puget Sound Regional Council, PSRC, that completed under FAA funding as the lead agency, the Regional Aviation Baseline Study. It was completed 2 years ago, and ultimately, and as you are probably very well aware, PSRC knows forecasting. When you go back and look 30 years ago at what PSRC predicted for today, they are spot on. They predicted a 27 million passenger gap, 800,000 metric tons of cargo, basically twice what exists today. And also, if we did not address the needs, a $31 billion annual economic impact loss and a loss of 209,000 jobs. Next slide. This work of the PSRC and the regional baseline study was also confirmed by a consultant named Kimley Horn, who is working right now on an aviation system plan for WSDOT Aviation. And they confirmed all of those numbers were in fact true. They tweaked them a little further. You can see here the impact of growth. We initially thought that Sea-Tac and Payne Field combined would reach capacity about 2027 to 2028. You can see the impact of the pandemic on those numbers. And essentially, we crossed the blue horizontal line now in approximately 2032. At that point in time, with all of the capacity improvements planned for both Payne Field and Sea-Tac, we will reach the limits. And then from that point on, demand will exceed supply. Although some demand will go to other airports around the state or will bypass Washington State completely, we still need 27 million passengers and 800,000 tons of cargo to meet the need. Next slide. So at the end of phase one in January 2022, we started off with a list of all the existing airports, 1 in eastern Washington, 17 around Puget Sound, and we took a look and said, can we take advantage of what these airports have to offer today, introduce or expand commercial service at each or many of those airports, and will that solve the problem? And the answer we came to in that first year as a commission was no. No. No airport existing right now around Puget Sound can expand to the point necessary to reach the target of 27 million passengers. It would take 5 or 6 commercial airports around Puget Sound, in addition to Sea-Tac and Payne Field, each one providing approximately 4 to 6 million passengers each, to go ahead and begin to address the capacity needs. The industry, as we had members of the CAC at the table, would not support spreading their assets, their employees, their equipment that thinly. Think of the Bay Area, where you have San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose. You have 3 airports in a triangular arrangement to meet the capacity of the entire area. Here, again, referring back to the 1992 study, Payne Field, Sea-Tac, and a South Puget Sound airport lined more in a straight line than in a triangle, but it would be 3 commercial airports would provide then the needed capacity over time. And that's where we were left after that first year. We can't do it with existing airports. We need a greenfield site. And a greenfield site, it's very important to understand what that means. It doesn't mean an undeveloped rural area. This is not a case where in Denver, Colorado, they could go out and buy 52 square miles of Adams County and only affect 11 landowners. That's not the case in Puget Sound. So by greenfield site, we mean simply a location where an airport does not currently exist. And we know and identify that, yes, these sites will in fact be home for businesses, rural communities, residents, churches, schools, and it will have an impact. There is no question that it will. But greenfield site was specifically that. It is not an existing airport. The CAC was not funded for the technical analysis to go there. And that's where WSDOT Aviation, and I have to give in particular credit to Senior Aviation Planner at the time, Rob Hodgman, for coming up with the concept on how do we get the research and analysis that we need to go ahead and identify that, given we weren't funded for that purpose by the legislature. So every 5 to 7 years, the state does an aviation system plan. This is funded by the FAA, and basically it's a clean sheet design where it's like, where are we? What do we have in the state for aviation? What do we need based upon the forecast, and how do we get there? So it was time to replenish that existing aviation system plan. And so they hired Kimley Horn as the consultant to do it, and the FAA backed it with funding, and we front-loaded with FAA approval to go ahead and study greenfield sites up and down Puget Sound that would help then fund and feed the data that the CAC needed. Tremendously creative, without spending a dime of CAC money or legislature appropriation to provide us the analysis that we needed. Next slide. So the aviation system plan, must be noted, was not bound by the same legislative restrictions on King County and military installations that the CAC was. They could look anywhere. They had no restrictions, and they did. And ultimately, They looked at 10 potential greenfield sites in 6 counties. And the reason why King County Southeast, in the middle of the pack there, has a double asterisk is because, again, the aviation system plan could consider King County, the CAC could not. So although the information was available to us, there was no action that could be taken by the CAC on that type of a greenfield site. Next slide. There were 8 major factors that were considered at a very high, very strategic level. Far more detail goes, and there's a little bit of the checking of the egg. Do you do work to figure out where could we put a new airport on a greenfield site? Or do you put a place on the ground to say, well, let's investigate that? And there's no right or wrong approach. Ultimately, we created 10 greenfield sites and said, what are the factors in each of these major 8 strategic areas? And I really want to call attention to the bottom line that you see there. That is the capacity that could be reached or achieved by each of those greenfield sites. And anything shy of 20 million passengers a year does not put a significant dent in what we really need 30, 40 years down the road. So this information then came to the CAC. We had to make a decision. It's also notable that of all of the 10 greenfield sites, the only one without a red metric is in fact King County Southeast. Only green and yellow. But again, we could not go there, so it was discounted. But notice the capacity potential it was provided based upon the areas that could be served. The commission then took a look at the 2 Snohomish County sites, but realized that that would conflict directly with Payne Field. So knowing that Payne Field and Snohomish County would have their own capacity needs in the future, King County then was off the table for consideration. That left the 2 Pierce County sites as being the ones that could provide the greatest dent in capacity. The commission was unsatisfied, however, in just looking at just Pierce County alone and wanted to know what else needed to be considered. So the next most viable site in the South Puget Sound was the Thurston County Central site, recognizing that it would only provide shy of 8 million passengers per year, but the end result would be, at least it would be helpful, but we needed to look at it. Next slide. So come this past October, we had to look at exactly where these sites are. So these are the 2 Pierce County sites here. One is south of Graham on the left. The one on the right is south of JBLM, does not overlap JBLM property. Next slide. The Thurston County Central site is south of the Lacey urban growth area, does overlie a portion of JBLM. The Thurston County South site, a little further to the southwest, was not considered. So those were the 3 greenfield sites that had the attention of the commission. Next slide. I was curious about exactly how much of an overlap there was JBLM, so this is my drawing, and any inaccuracies are mine. But that is a 6-mile diameter circle that duplicates the Thurston County Central site on top of the Thurston County Comprehensive Land Use Plan. And you can see where it touches the Lacey urban growth area to the north, and about 1/3 of the bottom part of that circle does in fact directly overlie JBLM. So that would mean that that portion of that circle could not be considered by the CAC, but a portion of it could, and that's why it remained in consideration. Next slide. So the end result was, with the data that came to us last October, the voting members of the commission made 2 recommendations in our phase 2 recommendation. The first one was to add capacity to Payne Field according to its airport master plan. And I believe, commissioners, you're familiar that an airport master plan is something that is required by the FAA to sponsor and create future development. It has an outlook for 10 years, or a near-term forecast for 10 years, and an outlook out to 20. So add capacity to Payne Field as it could according to its own master plan, but then continue to develop a greenfield site, a 3,100-acre, 2-runway configuration at one of 3 potential greenfield sites in Pierce or Thurston counties, and then take a little bit deeper dive in terms of airspace, structure, infrastructure, roads, and to see what we could do. Next slide. This is where it got interesting. So this past October, up until then, was the public, were local governments aware of the CAC? Probably in general terms, but as is no surprise, once you put 3 6-mile circles on the ground, you get everyone's attention. And the CACC did. Not a single local government, whether that be city, county, or port, nor any of 4 sovereign tribal nations, was willing to support the Thurston and Pierce County Greenfield site airport locations. None. None. Universally widespread public opposition. Admittedly, knowing transportation and infrastructure limitations, they were not on the I-5 corridor. They had no direct road support that was viable, no real major infrastructure in terms of wastewater, electrical generation power, stormwater capability, and then you add on top of that the environmental concerns. The Pierce County sites and the Thurston County site, all 3 directly affect the Nisqually River watershed, sacred grounds to the Nisqually Indian tribe. The Thurston County site also sits on top of the Thurston County aquifer. So you add all of that and you realize that this is a tough sell. And realizing that with the ability not to go to King County, not to affect JBLM, taking a look at these, we literally, as a commission, ran into a brick wall. Next slide. There was, however, some good news. The city of Yakima saw the efforts of the CACC. They were aware of it. They saw the needs for capacity, and they voted as a formal council and mayor, polled the city, got a 75 to 80% positive return rate, and said, we'll take it. Come here. And which is incredible. We had one government in the state of Washington that said, we want it, bring it, and we'll figure it out. As is no surprise, when you look at the number of passengers and the location of Yakima, when you break down the numbers, it meant that, great, we could go to Yakima, they would build the airport. Now we had to figure out a way of getting 55,000 passengers a day from Puget Sound to Yakima. How do we do that? As an example, rail, well, possibly. The highest, most dense corridor for rail in the country is the Acela train by Amtrak from Boston to New York to Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. In the 3 years prior to the pandemic, its average daily capacity was 9,700. We're talking 55,000 people a day to and from Yakima, from all corners of the state. How do we do that? There were 3 consistent responses from the public. Build to meet capacity in an environmentally sustainable way. Absolutely. When the commission started its work, we had 4 fundamental principles when we first met and said, this is how we're going to do our job. The first one is economic feasibility, and 2, public benefit. 3rd was environmental sustainability, and the 4th was social justice. And I will have to say the commission, in every deliberation, every comment, every discussion, adhered to those principles on a daily basis. That was one of the more rewarding parts of the work that we did. The public also said expand existing airports. Well, the commission had already been down that road and realized that was, we get why people would say that, but we had came to the conclusion that that was not achievable. And maximize travel by rail. There certainly is a role for high-speed rail to play, but that was not within the purview that was given to the commission, nor did we have the authority to investigate it. But it was a good public feedback. Admittedly, there's no question that high-speed rail, and we've seen this in Europe, where destinations of a certain distance now are obligated to go by rail rather than by air. So there is that capability if you build the system, but what the expense, and if you build it, will they come? The capacity of the Acela train and Amtrak is no question higher than 9,700 a day, but the tickets are not affordable and people will drive rather than take rail. So at what point does that break even? Something to be considered in the future, but certainly when we're talking about a major airport that will serve the domestic US, not international for this new capacity, is at some point in time, air does become far more efficient than rail. And so exactly where that line is, how that gets addressed, but certainly something, a data block, a check mark for future study. And lastly, the public outreach challenge. From the day that we started business, WASDOT Aviation created a distribution and a website for the CACC, and we had, at the end, 920 people had signed up for direct distribution right from the source on everything that we did. Within 3 weeks of putting the greenfield sites on the ground, Facebook groups started up that in 3 weeks had 4,200 members. How do we compete and get the word to people in a social media environment effectively? And that was definitely a challenge. I'll come back to that in a few slides. Next slide, please. One of the things that we need to be aware of is that no action does not mean no implications. And I know I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know, commissioners. Certainly, Sea-Tac will hit its capacity. What will be the impact of that? Mostly, it's going to be loss of service. And when you think about that, how does that play out? Well, when you have limited number of slots and arrivals and departures at Sea-Tac, the airlines are going to be forced to use bigger airplanes. That means the use of smaller aircraft to thinner routes and lower gauge equipment to other destinations that don't have the traffic will be lost. So you need the big jets, and people that want to go somewhere, whether it be the East Coast or to Orlando or Florida or any number of cities around the country, they'll have to connect. They'll have to go through Salt Lake or LA or Atlanta or Dallas or Chicago or Minneapolis. That's what they'll have to do, because you can't afford a larger number of smaller airplanes to thinner routes when you have the capacity and demand. They'll have to go somewhere else, and that means more connections and loss of nonstop service. Needless to say, higher prices, airfield restrictions, slot bidding among the airlines, you name it. Increased pressure then also on small commercial service airports. It might price a normal family out of the market, where they might have to go to Portland or to Tri-Cities or to Spokane to take their family on vacation. Next slide. Here's the public engagement metrics. Could we have done a better job? Absolutely. I am convinced, however, we did the best we could with the budget that we had and the consultant team that we had, and these bullets over these two slides tell the numbers. And they're available in your packet. You can come back to them. But tens of thousands of interactions with the public. I personally hosted the 5 virtual drop-in sessions. It was like ask any question, anytime, any boundaries, and we had over 400 people in those 5 sessions. I only wish that we had more time to answer everybody's questions. But all we could do was do the best we can. I will give the public credit. They were respectful, they were kind, they were demanding, but they wanted straight answers and straight talk. And rightly so, rightly so. So that was difficult, challenging, but it was an absolute pleasure to engage and to try to tell the story so that we were all on the same page going forward. Next slide. More metrics that we have right here, so you can see the numbers that we've done here. Okay, next slide. So on top of all this, given the public feedback, Arif already spoke to a little bit about the engrossed substitute House Bill 1791. The legislature realized we may need to reset this and take out the CACC and then replace it with another group. So that was the intention, to go ahead and do that. Repeal the statute. So as a result, the CACC, we had to take a seat back because, well, we see what the legislative intent was. We shouldn't have a meeting and make a recommendation when we may be abolished, and we didn't know what the governor would do. So, next slide. The bill passed. Unfortunately, the governor decided to veto most of the bill, 4 significant sections. Basically, one of the key ones was that he vetoed the section that would have abolished the CACC. And that meant that we were back in business, and we still had a statutory requirement to go ahead and make a recommendation. Next slide. So, we joined that meeting in June 9th, 6 days before the deadline, and ultimately we had to figure out how we were going to address what we had learned and what we were going to do. And given the time available, we created a survey to go ahead and hopefully point the commission in the right direction. I will go through these next few slides very quickly because, again, they're in your packet, and let's take them one at a time for the high-level overview of the results that came from the commission. Next slide. So, can we use an existing airport? Do we need a greenfield site? Clearly, greenfield site, the commission was unanimous about that fact for the last 2 to 3 years of our operation. Next slide. Should we go to Painfield or a greenfield site? We need a greenfield site. Painfield will help, but it's not the answer. Next slide. Which greenfield site do you prefer? Recognizing the feedback, the community, the lack of government support, the end result was we need a greenfield site. We don't know where it is. Next slide. Should Yakima be selected? I mean, they raised their hand. The answer was no, that we recognize the challenges of getting the people there, but we do appreciate their participation. Next slide. Do you believe it is possible to have a new primary commercial facility complete by 2040? Split. It takes forever to build an airport. It takes forever to build an airport. Denver, from 83 to opened in 95, 12 years. And that was with, a good start. We don't have that here yet. Next slide. And then what other important items need to be considered? Identify an airport sponsor. As you are, Port of Seattle is the sponsor for Port of Sea-Tac International Airport. That means the airport owner. So we have to find funding, we have to write a master plan, we have to find the infrastructure, we need industry commitments that they're gonna operate from the new site. Next slide. Would you prefer a no action alternative? No, because then we would forever throttle the economic impact of Washington State, locally and nationally. Next slide. Has the ability to make recommendations in King County been a hindrance, or inability rather? And yes, it was. Next slide. Even more so, by one additional vote, even not being able to talk to JBLM was also a hindrance. So both were limitations. Next slide. So ultimately, next slide, what were we to do? We needed to consider all of this: the feedback, the lack of local government support, lack of Indian sovereign nation support, the legislative intent. The governor's veto comment said, you guys need to go ahead and work on existing airports, as was part of his veto message. The survey responses, our statutory responsibility is we were told that we, by law, have to make a recommendation. Next slide. So the end result was, is we looked at what we needed to do, what the legislature asked us to do. Next slide. And ultimately, what the commission elected to do is, we don't have enough data or support or funding to really say one location on the ground. State legislature, here is the result, our survey results. And we presented that as a body of knowledge to the legislature to say, here is where we've been and what we need to go forward. And briefly, I'll finish up with, next slide. So the next steps, here's where we are. The CACC officially sunsetted, and I was put out of the chair job. Yay for me, effective June 30th. The COG legally established on July 23rd. Recruiting of the members will be on a schedule to be determined. Governor Inslee has indicated he will appoint this new body. I will offer the new work group with the transition, but these next few questions are really the key on what I want to leave with you today. Next slide. The next steps for all of us. Who will lead this effort? We have an interstate highway system because of President Eisenhower. We put a man on the moon in 8 years because of President Kennedy. Denver Airport was built in 12 years because of Governor Ray Romer and Mayor Federico Pena at the time. Governor Romer was quoted as saying, this decision on the airport will be the most important economic decision this state will make in 20 years. I would say in retrospect, probably the most important decision in 50 years. When you look at what Denver is today. 215 destinations from Denver. 4th largest airport in the country. So, but what does that mean now going forward for the rest of us? Next slide. We've got to expand the team, and we have to ask ourselves some hard questions. Do we agree we have a problem? Is commercial aviation capacity limitations a problem for us, for this state, for this economy? If we agree, if we don't agree, then we're done, and we can't move forward. But we have to agree as a group of all governments, federal, state, and local, ports, sovereign nations, the public, the communities. Next slide. If we agree there is a problem, is it worth solving? It's going to cost. There will be impacts, no question. If we can't agree it's worth solving, then we take the no action alternative. But if we agree it's worth solving, next slide, how do we solve it? And this is a big factor, because what the legislature asked the CACC to do was define where. We need to define not only where, but how. What will it look like? What emerging technologies come into play? How can we build the airport of the future? To some extent, we should consider this an opportunity, that this is not Sea-Tac 2.0 or Painfield 2.3. This is a new airport with a new opportunity to go ahead and protect and grow the economic demographics of the entire state and the region. We have a big part to play. We are one of the top 10 aviation destinations in the country. And how do we protect that capacity going forward? And lastly, next slide. If we're not willing to tackle those questions, are we willing to accept the consequences of no action? And with that, I thank you for your time. If there's any questions I could answer for you, it would be my pleasure.
Thank you so much for that thorough briefing. And this, for my colleagues, is an informational only item, so there will be no action associated with the item today, but I will open it up to comments and questions for commissioners at this time. Please let me know if you would like to ask a question or make a comment. Yeah, Commissioner Feldman.
Thank you so much for that bit of history, and
Yes, sir.
and congratulations on your retirement. And, and we should all be so lucky. But the thing that's always troubled me is, in addition to the need for general aviation and air cargo, of course, the airlines always talk about the need for connecting flights. And so your point about having the 3 airports in California, having some proximity, that's always some help. But the idea that back in 1992, that the recognition of the need for an airport to the south, this is clearly where our population growth in large part is going. It's where light rail is going. It just seems to be, I think one of the great challenges of Sea-Tac is our kind of inability to get people there and back in a mass transit kind of way. So that capacity is improving to the south. And the need for air cargo, and having, scattered small airports around the area does not really address the need for the consolidation of air cargo. But going to the south, again, you have some potential for equidistance to the Kent Valley Distribution Center, so that if you have something to the south and you have something at Sea-Tac, you can at least consolidate and redistribute as needed. Which then brings me to the fact that you had the luxury of this FAA Aviation System plan that sort of took off the bounds of the legislative restrictions. And you noted that North Carolina and Charleston has this joint use with a military base. And I'm just wondering, to the degree, I understand there's like a dozen places that have Air National Guard sharing space with commercial aviation, and something like a half dozen military bases that share that capacity. But North Carolina, I didn't know specifically about. But I'm just wondering, did the air safety plan get into any detail in terms of operationally how you make that happen? Because it strikes me that probably long after I'm gone, that's the only place that makes sense to me. But obviously the military feels otherwise. But so I'm just wondering, to the degree that, did you have a chance to dive into North Carolina?
Only from my military background and my commercial aviation background was I aware of these joint use airports. I had 24 years of military service, and I operated in my years with the Arizona Air National Guard, operated from a joint use field. It's doable, it's capable. The CACC could not go there because of the legislative restriction. And JBLM, when we drew the circles on the map, they did make a public statement through their public spokesperson. And we did have a representative of JBLM on the commission as a non-voting member. And they said, anything you do will impact the mission. And then that took it off the table. If we're serious about this going forward, all you have to do is Google, this is my own personal opinion now, but as an aviation representative that has been involved in this process, if you do a Google Earth search of Puget Sound, where is the land where you don't force businesses and communities to move? It's a JBLM. And we need to find a way, federally, state, local leadership, of bringing JBLM to the table on how can we meet your needs and restrictions while still meeting the needs of Puget Sound. In a large view, does the base have to be where the population is? No. The C-17s operate from Grant County International Airport. The Army trains at Yakima Reservation. Could there be some means by which this transition plan to Eastern Washington, but where does the aviation capacity have to be? It has to be where the people are. And that is the tiebreaker. And somehow we need to bridge that gap in my own mind going forward, to have that conversation, to go ahead and find out how do we meet everybody's needs. When I gave a presentation like this to Pierce County, one of the council members came up to me afterwards and said, Well, recognizing that the McCord runway may not work because it's too constrained, doesn't provide the true runway configuration, but if you built new runways further south into Fort Lewis, couldn't they be shared by the C-17s? Absolutely. All it takes is a little bit of effort. The Port of Tacoma, the Pierce County will fight tooth and nail to have any impact at all on JBLM, and they have told me directly. I understand that, but ultimately, if we're thinking 30, 40, 50 years down the road, the economic impact of a Sea-Tac type of airport with that capacity far exceeds the economic impact of JBLM. So yes, will there be churn, will there be impact? But in terms of where is the land, where is the need, where is the population growth, to me, I think there's a door there that needs to be opened, but it's going to take a lot of people at the table to go ahead and meet everybody's needs going forward. It's a difficult challenge.
I love the fact that somebody who has so much more experience than me come to the same conclusions. But the other component is that these communities are already exposed to heavy aviation noise, right?
True.
And so that there is also, when you talk about greenfield, this isn't greenfield in that sense. It's, you have that community exposure. You also have the idea that you would have residents rather than just transient communities in the military. But, Port of Tacoma, where as a Seaport Alliance member, it's a strategic port. It's important to have that relationship with the military, and the military needs to be there. It just seems to me that we've just been told, a priori, you can't look. And it just strikes me that, with some, that's why I was wondering whether being able to take a deeper dive to see, are there any ways in which these things could be accommodated? Moses Lake has the longest airfield, right? How much longer does it take to get there from, So anyway, but thank you for that candid response.
Commissioner Mohammed.
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you for the briefing. This was very informative, and I've said this before, disappointing at the same time. One of the questions that I had was around, to prevent the restart of the commission. To me, it seemed like maybe midway, some of what the outcome was of the commission and the direction that things were going in, and especially the response could have been predicted from the public and the community. And so were there any consideration midway to pause? I feel very disappointed that this whole thing is going to go back to the drawing board, and I'm curious if there's anything that you can share around that.
We considered that, especially given, when we got into the pandemic and it was like Teams and Zoom, and how do we do online, and how do we engage the public in a meaningful way? It was challenging, and there's no question there were lessons learned. And we wondered whether or not a pause would be appropriate. We had 4 non-voting legislative members on the commission as well, and the question was, should we go back and extend the timetable even further? But mostly it was like, let's continue this process and then see where we can get to figure out what's going on. But certainly the public feedback, even within the legislature, this bill passed unanimously in both houses, both sides of the aisle. And then the new work group did not. So clearly the message was being received by the legislatures in terms of the communities that they represented. What needs to happen going forward is, we don't necessarily have to start over, but certainly everything that we've done this past 4 years becomes now part of the body of knowledge, and we share that to the next group. My candid concern about the work group is their only requirement is to make an annual report to the legislature. They don't have a deliverable. They don't have a specific mandate. They don't have the authority to make any decisions. They have the ability and the task to go ahead and continue to study and make a report. And the open-ended question is, does that move the ball forward to meet the needs that we know are coming down the road? We in the planning business and in the port business are in the role of predicting the future, preparing our communities for the future that we know is coming. The question is how do we do that, and have total support and buy-in?
That's really, really helpful, and ought to be something that they consider in the future, having more than just an annual report being their responsibility. My other question is, how much time maybe was spent on discussing the public safety concerns at Sea-Tac Airport with the capacity increasing, and just knowing that there's clearly a consequence for a no action, and that there is a clear connection to public safety in connection to that we need to take action because at some point it's going to be a public safety concern. Was that a part of you guys' discussions, a big part of it? And then my last question is around strategies, talking about mitigation strategies for communities near these airports. I think a big reason why the public pushed back and a lot of communities pushed back is because people don't understand sort of the support that they will receive, especially for those who will live adjacent to an airport. And so if you can maybe speak to that a little bit, that'd be helpful.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. The safety and the social environmental concerns were upfront and personal to every member of the commission. We had about 4 or 5 informational sessions devoted to having environmental social justice experts come and speak to us. We had the benefits of the study of particulates and the work that was done here with regard to transportation infrastructure, impacts on communities, the particulates that were coming from exhaust, the impact of sustainable fuels that were being introduced here. But the trouble is, as you well know, is we could go 100% sustainable fuel from Sea-Tac International Airport, but that means all the other airplanes coming from everywhere else in the world are not burning that sustainable fuel. So there's still going to be that impact. And the question is, how do we move that forward? Senator Karen Kaiser and Representative Tina Orville. Senator Kaiser was the sponsoring member of the State House that brought the CACC to fruition because of the impact knowing on the communities. And that's why both Senator Kaiser and Representative Orville had seats on the commission as non-voting members. So they could then speak directly to the impact on the communities from both an environmental and safety aspect as well as a transportation aspect. That was key to our understanding. And then we had the benefit of the studies that came to us as well. So that was important. With regard to the second question going forward in terms of the communities going forward is we recognize that this has to be emerging technology. We have to use electric aviation. There are already aircraft flying, that are commercially sized, relatively small, range limited, but that could enter into commercial service once supervised or certified. They are already in testing and flying. So it's not a pipe dream. Some people believe it is, but it's not as far away as we think, and we need to embrace and fund and support those efforts because that will mitigate the particulates, that will mitigate the fuel issues, that will mitigate the emissions, and will provide a better capability with quieter operations. So yes, to both of your questions, spot on exactly where we need to go, but certainly a part of our conversations.
Yeah, I really appreciate the time and just want to say that I think embracing and funding these innovative ideas, and also I think there's an opportunity for the state and our legislators to understand that when you have an airport and the communities near it, they are it's a benefit to the entire region, and by providing support to them and showing that through funding and hearing them out better, I do think then people in the rest of the state will be more welcoming of an airport. So I say do right by Sea-Tac and the communities adjacent to our airport even more, and I think more communities will welcome a second airport, and we're ready for it. It's overdue, and thank you for your time and your service.
Thank you, Commissioner. I will say that our social justice guiding principle that we adopted our first year at our first meeting, first 2 meetings, was no one should benefit at the expense of any other segment of our community. Mm-hmm. That has to be part of the process going forward. If you can do that, then you will get buy-in.
Commissioner Hasegawa.
Well, I just wanted to open by thanking you for your leadership on this commission, and I heard you in your opening comments when you said it oftentimes feels like a thankless job, and we understand the challenges in navigating community concerns, balancing that impact with benefit and opportunity, and it truly is a balancing act. And I love what you said about making sure that opportunity for public engagement was there, your leadership in personally facilitating public comment and fielding questions and concerns with over 400 people, but that you referred to that as a piece of the joy of the work. Thank you. If it is thankless, then let me thank you personally. for that leadership. Commissioner Felleman asked my questions about future considerations of JBLM. I won't ask you to repeat your answer. And I did also hear you about alternatives, right? And that none of this exists within a silo. No action does not mean no impact. I do think that there are continued opportunities for leadership by the Port of Seattle. And just so that you know, we are having ongoing conversations about how we can continue to influence the state legislature for a continued conversation, not just about the development of a new greenfield space, but also about the establishment of a high-speed ground alternative, something that would give people both within time and economic balance, an alternative, a feasible alternative to travel, to aviation. But I also just wanted to reiterate, as the work of if you're the CACC, I think the next one's the COG.
Yes, that's what we've started to do with it.
I really appreciate your optimism and your framework that it's truly an opportunity about the how. And I mean, President Cho will be the first to tell you we've been recognized as the best airport in North America for 2 years in a row now. Come for our title, right? Think of something new and a more sustainable way for, as you put it, sir, the airport of the future and how we can build that to meet the needs of our region. But that ultimately, no matter how the COG is stood up, empowered, resourced, who's appointed to it, it is going to require political leadership at the executive level. And so that's the other thing that we need to balance as we hear your call for influence at the federal level in Congress to maybe open up some opportunities so that JBLM can be a more active part of the conversation, the consideration, the time urgency that we're seeing around all of this. We should have gotten started 10 years ago if we were truly going to meet the needs of what our projected growth and demand was going to be. And that we, after 12 tremendous years, will be welcoming a new governor, and that there is a presidential election upon us. And so these are conversations, there is political uncertainty. And those are all things that we're just going to have to continue to navigate and lean into together. And everybody's going to have to lean into those conversations. But that awareness aspect and the continued opportunity for leadership by the Port of Seattle to talk about the urgency of these needs, that we cannot meet the needs of this region. And we are doing everything that we can to keep up with the current rate of demand, to say nothing of what's to come. So you have us in partnership. Thank you so very much for the thoughtful presentation, and thank you so much for all your work to date. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Hasegawa. I had a few questions for you as well. That slide you had with essential factors that was color-coded, green, white, green, I think it was red and yellow.
We refer to it as our chiclet chart, for
Okay.
lack of a better term.
Were your chiclets weighted?
Yes.
They were.
Yeah,
So
they-
how were they weighted?
Each one of those, and all of this information is available.
And can we go back to that slide, please?
Sure can. It would have been slide 10.
There you go.
Yep. So each one of those factors, green, yellow, or red, were a defined metric within that strategic area, whether it be terrain, property acquisition, or the entire list there. And so the question was, we defined a metric, based upon those three color codes, and then the question was, as the aviation system plan with its research analyst team then would go into each of those sites and say where in that metric did the criteria be reached. And there was a lot of detail involved in each of those to go through, but in terms of each one of those had its own specific set of metrics that ultimately determined what its color coding would be.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. The essential factors column with the terrain impact, property acquisition, environmental justice, those had what you're calling criteria?
Criteria. Each one of those categories had 3 separate criteria.
Yeah.
That to be green, you had to reach this level. To be yellow, you fell within this range. To be red,
Okay.
you fell below a certain benchmark.
I understand that, but I guess what I'm asking is, were they weighted relative to each other?
Oh, no, they were not.
And
No,
why
they-
was
there
not-
No,
why
they
was
were
that
8
not?
standalone, thank you for that. Yes, there were 8 standalone factors that were not, they were not prioritized among them.
Okay, so for instance, population served was not weighted greater than, for instance, terrain impact?
No.
They were looked at separately
They
from
were
each
looked
other?
at separately. That's correct.
Okay. And then, I think one comment I'll make, I think that's important, first of all. I think it is important to weight these, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are not factors independent of each other,
That's correct.
right? This is part of a holistic analysis, and to not weigh one thing that might be more important in analysis than the other, I think is a huge miss. And I think perhaps if you did weight this, the ultimate what is green or what was yellow or what was red might have changed a little bit, right? And so I don't know that for a fact, but for instance, if environmental justice was higher up or weighted more, right, that could have skewed some of these sites in one way or another, or cost, right, property acquisition, right? Certain areas are more expensive than others, right, to acquire property in, and how much of that is weighted relative to environmental justice, right? And so I'm just throwing that out there. I understand that this is sunsetting, so obviously there's nothing we can do at this point, but it's just on the record, something that I'm a data guy, clearly, and something that we should take into account for future studies. I think that's really, really important. And I don't know if you want to comment or agree, but I think that was my initial reaction when I saw this.
I think those points are very well taken because, for example, a wetland impact or a floodplain impact, on one side, you can look at that and go, the science and technology may allow us to find ways to mitigate that. It's just a matter of cost
Correct.
and degree.
Correct.
But environmental justice, wait a second. Now we're talking people.
Right.
We're talking environment. And
Right.
we're talking long-term protection of the earth. And now that has a whole different level. But that gets down to the site analysis and again,
Sure.
the funding that was
Sure.
available, the amount of time that we had available, and the ability for the team to provide us within the timeframes that we had by statute, or that we will do what we can, recognizing that this is only scratching the surface. This
Right.
didn't even look at airspace, for example.
Right,
And
that was
there
my
were
next
a
question,
whole
actually.
Issues with regard to airspace in terms of what
Right.
that was. Ultimately, what it came down to the commission is recognizing that the overall value of this certainly has a political overtone in terms of our communities, the social and environmental piece especially. It was where can we meet the capacity, because that's what we were charged to do, meet
Right.
the capacity. And then again, going forward, I think your comments, Commissioner, are exactly what needs to be considered as the body of politics goes forward.
Great, I appreciate that. Actually, my second question was regarding, JBLM, and when we eliminated JBLM, you said it was because of geographic overlap, but I was going to ask you if that's physical geography on the ground or airspace overlap as well.
JBLM, in their public statement, said both. Even citing near JBLM
Right.
would be an issue because the amount of helicopter traffic that takes place to and from their
Right.
facilities that overfly local communities.
Because I've often heard the argument that the reason Boeing Field can expand to commercial is because it's the same airspace as Sea-Tac. And so I don't know if that's the case.
That is definitely true. Boeing Field right now operates under the umbrella of the what's called Class Bravo airspace
Okay.
for Sea-Tac. And so there are definite impacts for Boeing Field not being able to expand. And even today, under instrument flight conditions, departures and arrivals at Boeing Field are impacted based upon the nature of the traffic at Sea-Tac.
Okay,
But
great.
even to some extent, as far north as Payne Field is, Payne Field also,
Right.
their airspace is impacted by Whidbey Island Naval Air Station as well as the Sea-Tac Boeing Field operations.
That's great insights. And then lastly, I just want to make a point here, and I think what you said earlier about aviation needing to be where the people are. I really have a problem with that, and I want to challenge that point because I feel like there are countless examples around the world where the airport isn't near a high population dense area, right? London, Hong Kong, Seoul, South Korea. You take a 45-minute to an hour train into the city. And I know that you made a reference to the Acela train. I've taken the Acela many times from DC to New York, and let me just tell you, that's not a standard we should be aspiring to. It is not a great service. It is not fast. It's kind of sad, actually, how slow that train is. And we know that states like California are building trains between LA and San Francisco. I like to think big picture and think, why can't we connect Spokane to Seattle and have Yakima in between, right? And have that 45-minute train between Seattle and Yakima to Spokane. That's far shorter distance than LA to San Francisco, or even San Francisco to the Central Valley. And so I think, I appreciated this presentation because it actually highlighted some of the, and no offense, the crutch of what you were authorized to do. You were not allowed to consider King County, JBLM was off the table, and I feel like you were kind of set up for failure, kind of, in a sense. Yeah, no research budget to do the real due diligence. And so I would hope that, going forward, whether we call it the COG or whatever, that we put some real resources behind this and intentionality, that this isn't some performative, thing that we're doing to appease a bunch of politicians who are pissed off about airplane noise in our neighborhood, right? I don't know why Yakima was eliminated and not just suggested with an asterisk next to it. I noticed that the recommendation suggested we should do this, provided that we expand Payne Field and Sea-Tac. Well, that's an asterisk in my view, right? So I don't understand why the committee decided to eliminate Yakima altogether and not provide a qualified, right, conclusion that says Yakima would be great if X, Y, and Z, right? And lastly, I'll get off my soapbox. To your point, there's a tremendous amount of emerging technology happening. Right, I just had a meeting a couple of days ago who was interested of a tech entrepreneur who wanted to do vertical takeoffs from the downtown Seattle area to the airport. Right, a lot of aviation's doing some amazing stuff up north, and so I do feel like this is a once in a generation opportunity. And I'd be remiss if I didn't just mention that there are trillions of dollars in the federal government for infrastructure projects right now, right, that need to get out the door in the next 5 years. Like, this is a golden opportunity for us if you really look at it from a 10,000-foot level perspective. And this political BS, quite frankly, is really getting in the way of, I think about Sound Transit and light rail. And if we had built that 30 years ago, if we didn't, politicize it and we just made the right decision, we wouldn't be where we are today, right? And so I really am hoping that we can get to a point where we can make smart, data-driven decisions that really look towards the future, and we can really shy away from all this political gesturing and performance. And this is not, a sentiment of you or your work. I echo the sentiments of my colleagues. I want to thank you so much for all the tremendous work that you've done, and congratulate you on finally your retirement. But I hope that there are some strong lessons learned from this experience that will carry over to the next experience. And so with that, I will close this section of the agenda. Thank you so much again for coming in and providing that briefing. Thank you.
Commissioners. Thank you, Director Metric. Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Deputy Clerk Payne, if we can go on to the next item, and Executive Director Metric will introduce the item.
Thank you. This is item 10C, authorization for the executive director to enter a contract for the procurement of a proprietary shore power system consisting of 2 mobile cable positioning devices for Pier 91 in the amount requested of $2,500,000 of a total estimated project cost of $2,750,000.
Commissioners, acquiring these mobile cable positioning devices will increase the ability of cruise ships at Terminal 91 to plug into shore power capable. Due to varying ship configurations, there are currently instances where the ships cannot access shore power due to simply to location and positioning of the vessels. And this action will support our efforts to be the greenest port in North America and our work to ensuring that every cruise ship at our port utilizes shore power no later than the year 2030, if not sooner. I have to say is I know we've addressed some of these issues already. And here presenting today is Linda Springman, Director of Cruise Operations, and Kelly Purnell, Capital Project Manager.
Thank you. Thanks, Executive Director Metric. Is my mic on? Thanks, Executive Director Metric, and good afternoon, Commissioners. Go ahead to the next slide. Go to the next one, sorry. I'm here today to request authorization for the Executive Director to enter into contract for the procurement of 2 cable positioning devices as a retrofit to our existing equipment at Terminal 91. Today, we are asking for authorization of $2.5 million for purchase and installation of this equipment.
Next slide. As you know, we currently have 2 shore power connections at Terminal 91. When they were first installed here in Seattle at Terminal 30, they were the 2nd and 3rd shore power connections in the world. When Terminal 91 cruise terminal was completed, the equipment was relocated to this new location 15 years ago. Since that time, shore power development has continued to evolve. As you also know, we are in the middle of a project at Pier 66 to install shore power, and that equipment will come with this flexibility provided by cable positioning devices, allowing for approximately 40 feet of variation from either side of the fixed installation to accommodate the positioning of shore power connections on board ships. Unfortunately, given the variation of ship sizes and design, there is no standard for location of this equipment on board ships. With the goal of minimizing operational challenges to daily ship turn operations, adding this flexibility to the equipment at Terminal 91 minimizes gangway moves and reduces other operational issues that might need adjusting related to efficient ship turnarounds, including luggage load and offload, and provisioning, with the goal of providing the best optimization of our assets and their lifespan and accelerating emissions reductions by eliminating barriers. Next slide. In 2022, of the ships equipped with shore power, 83% connection rate was achieved. This resulted in 2022 of avoiding 2,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions. And anecdotally, through June of this year, we had already achieved 40 shore power connections, and we're waiting for the July numbers. Next slide. This effort aligns with the Port Century Agenda goals to responsibly invest in economic growth of the region, being the greenest and most energy-efficient port in North America, and being a highly effective public agency. Next slide, and I will now turn it over to Kelly Purnell, the project manager for this effort.
Is this working? Okay, great. Good afternoon, Commissioners, Executive Director. We will be procuring 2 mobile cable positioning devices, or CPDs, to modify the existing shore power connection systems on Pier 91 east and west berths. The CPDs are built on a mobile emission-free platform with an extendable boom that has a multi-directional pivot. The CPDs have the capability to move the large shore power cables up and down the pier, as they are not fixed to a single point of connection. Currently, the shore power cables run to static connection points on the piers on a fixed jib crane. The Pier 91 West jib crane is shown in this image. You can see that it's quite fixed. As you can see, it has limited maneuverability and limited reach. Due to the constraints of the existing shore power connection system, not all shore power capable ships can plug in, as Linda discussed previously. Next slide. For our procurement of the 2 CPDs, we have obtained a competition waiver to enter a contract with Watts Marine. In this image on the slide is an example of the mobile cable positioning devices that Watts Marine's built. In comparison to the fixed jib crane shown on the previous slide, the device allows maximum flexibility through maneuverability along the pier, as well as the extendable boom that can move in multiple directions to extend the shore power cables for plug-in to the ships. The existing shore power cable will be removed from the existing jib crane. The jib cranes will be decommissioned, and the cables will be relocated onto the mobile CPDs. The procurement package will include design and engineering, delivery, installation, and commissioning of the CPDs, along with some minor electrical modifications. Watts Marine will then also be contracted to operate the system once installed. Next slide. Our goal for the schedule for this project is to start our procurement in Q3 of this year, so shortly after authorization to proceed. Delivery and installation of the mobile CPDs is anticipated in Q2 of 2024 and in use for the 2024 cruise season. The intent is to avoid any impacts to the cruise operations for 2024. Next slide, please. We have estimated our project cost to be $2.75 million. Our estimate for the procurement package of that amount, as described previously, is $2.5 million, with $250,000 in our soft costs. Next slide. That is the conclusion of our presentation.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Any questions from commissioners before we vote?
Of course.
All right.
So I see this is being paid for by the tax levy, whereas the other one was based on general revenue, general fund. I mean, it's all the same pot of money, but the fact it's distinguished as tax levy money, is there a rationale for that? I mean, it is part of our, that's on page 6 of the memo.
Sorry, I was going to point out, I think Dan has his hand up. Dan, are you responding to Commissioner Feldman?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, Commissioner, the memo does say that's tax levy funded. However, that was supposed to have been changed, so I apologize. That should be general fund, just consistent with the Pier 66 shore power project. Apologize for the mistake.
Very good. Thank you for that clarification. I did have another question was about the, how many more ships then? You say right now we're getting 69 of 83 have connected to the shore power at this 83% rate, right? So is that of all the shore power capable vessels, or is that just totally all the vessels that called on the port, 83% could do it? I'm just wondering, how many more ships do we get if we have this capability?
It's a combination of factors. So that's, the 69 is of the shore power capable ships. There are about just under 200 calls at Terminal 91, and they are not all shore power capable right now. What this does is it's going to first of all, the 2 of the ships that are there right now, we have to move the gangways for them to be accommodated. And so we're hoping to stop moving gangways. We talked about gangways earlier today. And then next year we have a couple different ships coming in, and we want to be able to accommodate them. So any ship that is shore power capable this year that is trying to plug in, we are accommodating via the gangway move.
So that will be the case. So any ship that will be shore power capable will be able to be plugged in with the advent of movable gangways and movable shore power.
Yeah, both are interrelated with the gangway procurement and this shore power.
So then I question, why is it that we have a 2025 goal to require shore power capable ships to add Terminal 91? I mean, if you're shore power capable and we can provide the power, why isn't it just a requirement that you'll use it, given the fact they're going to save money on fuel anyway?
Some of the ships don't have shore power right now, so you're talking about they're planning to deploy shore power capable ships here. Right now, the requirement we have is by 2030, all ships will be shore power capable, and we're having very productive discussions about accelerating that right now.
No, but I'm saying by 2025, we say if you are capable to plug in, you will plug in.
Yes.
Why isn't that currently? Or at least next year when everybody who can plug in can plug in.
We do say that now. If your ship is shore power capable, you will plug in.
All right, so it just says in the page 2 of the memo that won't be called for until 2025. I thought that was the case too, don't get me wrong. That was always my understanding, so I was a little dumbfounded when I saw this to be the case, because it doesn't require you to be shore power capable, but if you are, and now the problem is no longer ours to get you the cable, why isn't that just a requirement?
You are correct. Good catch on that. If your ship is shore power capable, we expect you to plug in now. And by 2030, we expect ships to plug in.
So that's like in the tariffs or whatever?
Yeah, that is in the tariff, the 2030 date.
So cool. I caught 2 mistakes so far, right? Let me see if I can keep on. No. I think that covers it. The only question, like the other one can see this as sort of like a crane, like the analogy for Seaport Alliance, right? The tenant pays for the crane, or the gangway could be seen as the crane for the humans, but we absorb these costs.
We are buying the equipment. When the ships arrive and plug in, they cover the costs of actually hiring the staff to do the plugging in and paying the electricity.
And did we work this out with ILW in terms of who's doing the work at this point?
We have not had that discussion about these extensions. But they are currently doing that at Terminal 91 with the fixed jet.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, can I get a motion and a second for this item?
So moved.
Second.
All right, Deputy Clerk Payne, please call the roll for the vote.
Thank you. Commissioner Feldman?
Aye.
Commissioner Hasagawa?
Aye.
Commissioner Mohammed?
Aye.
And Commissioner Cho.
Aye.
Has 4 ayes and 0 nays for this item.
Excellent, the motion passes. All right, Deputy Clerk, please read the next item into the record, and Executive Director will introduce it.
This is item 10D, authorization for the Executive Director to advertise, award, and execute a major works construction contract to complete the redevelopment of the Terminal 91 berths 6 and 8 to utilize a project labor agreement, and to enter into agreements in support of completion of the work, including tribal agreements for Terminal 91 berths 6 and 8 redevelopment and additional stormwater treatment construction funding in the amount of $71,825,000 and a total estimated project cost of $76 million.
Commissioners, this project will redevelop the berths and adjoining apron areas along the northeast side of Terminal 91. This new infrastructure will help ensure the long-term viability of the port as the home to the North Pacific fishing fleet. In addition, this project will also remove over 2,000 creosote piles from the waterway. And our presenters this afternoon are Kelly Goodwin, Senior Manager, Maritime Operations, and Mark Longridge, Capital Project Manager. So I think, Kelly, turn it over to you first.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners, and thank you, Executive Director Metrick. We're here to request, next slide, please. Here to request construction authorization for just under $72 million for the redevelopment of berths 6 and 8 at Terminal 91. Next slide, please. I'm going to touch on the purpose and need for this project, and then Mark will share a little more detail about the project itself. Terminal 91 is located at the north end of Elliott Bay. Berths 6 and 8 reside in the northeast corner of Pier 90. The green box area on this slide shows the project location, approximately 65,000 square feet of berth space. These berths are the last 2 berths requiring redevelopment from load-restricted creosote-soaked timber to modern, strong, pre-stressed concrete at this terminal. This project is crucial to anchoring the commercial fishing and supporting businesses in this region. The thing I love about Terminal 91 is how unique this property is in the port's portfolio. It's one of, if not the first property purchased by the port around 1911. And today it serves a multitude of uses vital to our harbor and our region. I think of it as a port within a port due to the sheer size of the property, approximately 200 acres, as well as the number of uses taking place here. No other property can boast that it serves as home to the North Pacific catcher processor fleet and accommodates 2 cruise ship berths at over 1,200 lineal feet each, and when not full with these vessels, accommodates research vessels, ships of state, tugs, barges, other maritime users, and has fish processing cold storage facilities on site as well. Next slide, please. This slide shows Terminal 91 in full swing. Here you can see just how congested and busy those pier aprons are when the fleet is alongside. Our project area is located at the top right corner of this slide, just south of the Magnolia Bridge. And the fishing fleet that calls Terminal 91 home fishes one of the best managed fisheries in the world, with the smallest carbon footprint of almost any protein. The Wild Alaska pollock fishery is certified by both the Responsible Fisheries Management and the Marine Stewardship Council programs, both of which are recognized by the Global Sustainable Seafood Initiative. When the fleet is in port, they rely on wide, strong pier aprons to offload frozen fish, fish meal, roe, and fish oil. This infrastructure is also vital to the network of maritime services requiring access to these ships to perform repairs, upgrades, and maintenance. Each of the commercial fishing vessels that moor at 91 employ 50 to 150 crew members, and these are U.S. flagged vessels. The port's most recent economic impact study identified that in 2017, commercial fishing contributed 11,300 jobs to our state and $1.4 billion in business output. Additionally, the 2017 fishing vessel moorage analysis from S2 Strategy noted, quote, fishing and seafood processing sector of maritime industry as a whole has by far the largest revenue impact to the state of any maritime sector and is at least equal in job production to the other sectors, unquote. The vendors and service providers serving these ships are local and provide family wage maritime industrial jobs in our region. For example, more than 20 welders and refrigeration craftspeople recently spent 3 months upgrading the refrigeration system on board the vessel Excellence, and you can see her at the bottom right of this slide. And that's not unique to that vessel. That sort of activity is taking place on each of these vessels when they're in port. And important to note too is the commercial fishing industry continued to be stable and working throughout the COVID pandemic. Next slide, please. This is just a snapshot of our daily berth plan when the fleet's in port. And you can see that the only open, underutilized space is in the location of our project in the lower right corner. Next slide, please. So this fleet is modernizing, and our customers are investing millions of dollars to build brand new vessels and or modernize existing vessels. The bottom left picture of this slide shows a new build, or relatively new build, America's Finest. And she's receiving finishing touches at Dakota Creek Shipyard in Anacortes, where she was built. And just today, this morning, the 328-foot brand new Arctic Fjord pulled into Terminal 91. And she's replacing the older 275-foot vessel. When we came to you for design authorization, the new Arctic Fjord was just a rendering, as seen at the top right of this slide. And now she's a reality, sitting alongside our pier. The new builds are larger than the vessels they're replacing, and this means that vessels that previously may have been able to moor at Fisherman's Terminal or the MIC are now too long and are looking to moor at Terminal 91. Fishing companies are also growing. For example, both Ocean Peace and O'Hara companies have added additional vessels to their fleet in the last 5 years and want to be at Terminal 91. Restoring existing load-limited and partially condemned moorage facilities to their full capacity is the first step in meeting these needs. Demand for moorage continues to grow, and this project responds to that demand. Redevelopment of berths 6 and 8 is critical to ensuring the long-term viability of the port as the home to the North Pacific fishing fleet. So I'd now like to turn it over to Capital Project Manager Mark Longridge, and he'll discuss the details of the project.
Thanks, Kelly. Next slide, please. So as Kelly mentioned, I'm Mark Longridge. I'm a Capital Project Manager here in the Waterfront Project Management Group. I'd like to tell you a little bit about our planned project work, but first paint a better picture of the current facility and its condition. So the berth 6 and 8 area of Pier 90, as Kelly mentioned, is the oldest remaining section of the original piers and its creosote timber pile construction. It was originally built as one of the first port facilities and had been updated over the decades, both in the 40s, substantially when the Navy took over the facility, and most recently in about 1985. The pier structure has some significant deterioration, and most of the facility is significantly load restricted, with the balance being condemned. While we use the berths as lay berth facilities occasionally, they are not available as full berths for our customers to offload and service their vessels. Next slide, please. Having a closer look under the deck, we can see some of the deterioration of the facility and the tight spacing necessary for the older style of creosote timber pile supported pier on the right here. Each of our new precast piles will be substantially stronger than the existing timber piles, and so will allow a much wider spacing of the piles and the pier bents underneath the pier. This means while we'll be removing over 2,200 creosote piles, the new stronger pier will only need about 240 piles to support it. While not the primary goal of the work, the removal of these deteriorated creosote piles from the water column will be a significant environmental benefit from our work as well. Next slide. Here we can see a cross-section of the proposed pier, including those precast piles and deck panels that I mentioned. Our work will also reshape the slope along the berth and replace the existing rock with a thick layer of protective riprap and a layer of fish rock to improve both its stability and the habitat of the berth. While this project does not include any significant berth deepening, we are dredging some areas to reinforce the toe of the slope, as you can see here in the yellow cross-section. All of these load-bearing piles that we're going to use in the new facility will need to be impact-driven and proofed within our permit window. And we have been and will keep working with our neighbors, including the Queen Anne and Magnolia Neighborhood Advisory Council, or NAC, to keep them up to date on the project and minimize any potential impacts from the construction, including construction noise. In our design effort for the pier, we discovered that to meet the current seismic code, our work needed to extend behind the seawall on the left of this slide and include significant ground improvements to stiffen up the soil in that area also. Next slide. This expanded our scope of the project to include replacement of a collection of mobile buildings on and behind the apron, including both tenant and port operation spaces. And that provided some more sustainability opportunities in completing our work as well. Our plans include replacing the 6 existing buildings on site now with 2 consolidated ones for tenant and port staff, respectively. We plan to include solar PV panel arrays on the port-occupied building that are sized to cover the annual electric needs of that building. We have also included an innovative sanitary sewer connection system for vessels using the berth and have been working with our fleet managers to include extra electric vehicle charging spaces to support their efforts as well. Working with the stormwater staff, we identified an additional 100,000 square feet of terminal area outside of our affected project area that we can provide treatment for by adding additional vaults under our contract work, and so we're taking advantage of that opportunity also. And as I mentioned, the removal of the deteriorated creosote dock provides the largest environmental benefit of our work by far. Next slide. Looking at our project schedule, we're currently putting the finishing touches on our design ready-to-bid package and waiting for final federal and city permits before advertising the contract. Our hope is to advertise as soon as possible and execute the contract towards the end of this year. This will help our selected contractor procure the long lead items that they need, such as precast and electrical components, to be ready to start the work, and in particular be ready for the in-water work window opening in August of 2024, which you can see on this schedule. Our construction schedule is aggressive to get the facility completed and online as soon as possible, and the current schedule has the work completing in the third quarter of 2025. Next slide, please. As you know, no capital project is without risk, as this cone of uncertainty that you're familiar with shows. While we continue to get more certainty in the work as we progress to the right, there is still a significant amount of uncertainty to our work. We continue to see a volatile construction market, escalating prices, and long lead items for critical project elements. Next slide. In light of this, in our design effort, we performed a comprehensive risk analysis of the project at several stages in the design to identify, quantify, and potentially mitigate project risks as much as possible. As you can see in this table, though, there are still risks we're facing, and we will continue to monitor and mitigate these. Next slide. So as Kelly mentioned in her remarks, we're coming to you today for the full construction authorization of just under $72 million to advertise, award, and complete this work under a project total of $76 million. With your approval today, we'll be able to complete our design and permitting efforts, advertise the work, and complete the work to modernize the last remaining piece of one of our key industrial terminals. Next slide. And with that, we'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Great. Any questions for staff? Thank you for the presentation. Yeah, Commissioner Mohammed.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for the presentation. We are proud of the history of Terminal 91 and our fishing fleet, and so I really do appreciate the important work that you all are doing. I do have 2 questions. One is any of the portion of the funding that is being asked will be considered for any sort of grant funding? Is any of this project eligible for that? And if so, could you share a breakdown of that?
I see Director Lyles came on, but I was going to respond. We are looking at grant opportunities if they're available through our external relations and government relations staff. And if anything is available, we'll certainly work to take advantage of that.
Okay. And then my other question is could you elaborate just a little bit on the reasons behind the increase in the total project estimate? How much of that is supply chain issues? Could someone share just a little more information on that?
Absolutely. So at a planning level estimate, when we came for design, the project was significantly lower cost. That's part of that cone of uncertainty. The major changes that we've seen are some expansion of scope. Like I said, to meet the current seismic code, we had to expand the project beyond just the pure replacement and include some deep soil mixing and soil stabilization behind the pier, which then means we need to move the buildings out of the way to be able to do that. So we're getting more scope than we originally planned. We will get refreshed facilities for the port and for tenant operators and users of the facility. So we have a little bit more scope, but we've also seen historic escalation and some really big changes since we came to you, I think, in 2019 for the initial one. And so that's incorporated in there. In our current estimate, we do have a significant amount of contingency. We've escalated these costs. We see that volatility in the market, but we're trying to get the best cost that we can, and that's why we see the higher price.
How does that information come back to the public when some of that is sorted out?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Just with the estimated cost, I mean, I guess they'll come back to commission for approval, right?
Correct. This is the funding for the entire, so we've carried this project at a total of $70 million in the last 2 annual budgets, and it's now at $76 million would be the project total for this cost. The details of our estimate, we want to make sure that we can certainly share those with you. We want to be careful to not show our cards for potential bidders too and spoil that surprise.
That makes sense. Thank you for those answers.
All right, hearing no further, go ahead, Fred.
That's Commissioner Fred to you. So I thank you so much. You know, it's an enormous sum of money that we need to spend to preserve our assets if we're going to be a port. So I'm fully in support of the idea, the fact that we're getting rid of creosote, all that good stuff. More stormwater than we need. Thank you. It's all good. So why'd we let it go so long? Well, how are we in a situation where we have a condemned dock?
So I can only speak to that anecdotally. And starting this project, one of the tasks I tried to do was to find out how long this had been load restricted or condemned. Like I said, the last major work we saw was in 1985. I couldn't find anyone at the port who'd worked here long enough to be able to give me that answer. So it has been in this condition for some time. It's been an item on the capital plan, and I think under consideration for a long time, but this is the first time that we've had it get the backing to be able to complete the design and do complete the work. I don't know if that is a clear enough answer for you.
No, thank you for getting to it. It's an important asset.
Yeah, and I know also in our planning process over the years, I happen to be talking to some of the planners on this, is that they looked at comparisons like investment, return on investment in this versus things like acquiring other properties. So, I mean, there was a time when we were assessing, is it worth the reinvestment here versus other uses of the funds?
I'm sure the dilapidation occurred well before your tenure here. I mean, it's obviously been unattended to for some time. You also,
Commissioner.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I had my hand raised. Kenny Lyles, Director of Operations and Security. I would like to highlight that Mark Longridge, our capital project manager, was the project manager over the southwest portion of Pier 91. So it's not a case of overall neglect. We have been upgrading the infrastructure. We also recently upgraded the northwest pier fender system. So we are incrementally addressing some of these, end of life portions of the dock. And Mark, you could probably add to that if you would like, but I wanted to make sure that we did include that as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that clarification. And I'm a fan of infrastructure. I want you to spend the money. This is what we're here for. And I didn't mean to point fingers there. But one of the things you also are doing is doing a pump out, right? You're talking about putting a pump out on the system. And is FOSS still
Not
going
quite a
to?
pump out, it's a connection, so we're not quite sure how it's gonna work yet, but.
But sorry, it's not a pump out. It's actually a connection to the sewer system.
Correct.
And better yet. So, and will FOSS still be a tenant to the south? I mean, to the north? I saw that in that design, it said tugs.
That's to be determined. We still need to see how we'll accommodate everybody and have the highest use for those berths.
I see. Well, I didn't really care whether it was FOSS or not, but I know that we're looking to have places for tugs to pump out. And to the degree that this berth would be able to be accessed by vessels in need of that service, which are mostly tugs. I was just wondering whether, or, so my question is, could we position a pump out, for lack of a better word, at a place that would be multiply accessible? You know, I'm just wondering if we're thinking about that, because we do know the marine trade folks are asking us to look for capacity to do that, and I just don't know if that's kind of part of your scope of thinking.
It's definitely on our mind as we look at our assets and working with our planning team to see where we can meet the needs of our maritime users. How it'll work with this facility, we're not quite sure yet. Certainly, it won't be a consistent access with the fishing vessels blocking access at certain parts of the year, but when the fishing fleet's out, we'll see how these work and if we can make them work for that.
And I would also encourage us or discourage us for defining the way in which the piles are going to be driven, that we need piles to be put in. We have run into some challenges at the Seaport Alliance, specifying we should be calling for what needs to be done, how it's done. Seems to me should be the responsibility of the contractor. From a liability perspective, I just suggest that we define the need and somebody else does the how.
Yeah, we do have, there is some flexibility within the contract, but to get our construction permit, we do have to provide the structural calculations that show the capacity of those piles and for the geotechnical conditions that we have. So we can't performance spec it too much, but we do provide, there is that flexibility within the contracts.
And finally, you're putting solar on the roofs. This is like the fourth project I've seen like this year that we're solarizing. There's been a long time since we've been describing solar. It's not cost effective because we have a low carbon electrical grid already. What's the net benefit of doing that? I'm delighted. I've always said that by reducing the demand on the grid, obviously you just saw in the paper, you know, with the melt of the Skagit, we're gonna be buying power from California. I think the more we take responsibility for generating our own electricity, I salute you for taking that initiative, and thank you.
All right, hearing no further questions for this item, is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
All right, the motion was made and seconded. Deputy Clerk, please call the roll for the vote.
Thank you. Commissioner Fellman?
Aye.
Commissioner Hasegawa?
Aye.
Commissioner Mohammed?
Aye.
And Commissioner Cho?
Aye.
There are 4 ayes and 0 nays for this item.
Excellent, the motion passes. Thank you very much. Thank you. Deputy
Commissioner,
Clerk-
can I make
Thank
one
you.
comment here
Yeah,
as you
go
finish
ahead.
up? I just want to say that, Kelly, you saw the one slide there that showed the positioning of the vessels there. I just want to call out Kelly Goodwin and her team about, that is a thing, we just kind of went over that really quickly. That's something they do continuously to find as more and more demands for larger and larger ships, that is something that the team does an excellent job on. And they don't get a chance to always talk about that here. So I just want to give them a shout out.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
All right, Deputy Clerk Payne, please read the next item into the record, and Executive Director will then introduce it.
Thank you. This is item 10E, authorization for the executive director to increase the contract value for the existing service contracts for custodial services at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport by $54,300,000 for a new cumulative value of $149,300,000. To authorize the executive director to recompete and execute up to 2 5-year custodial service contracts, to add waste removal services for the airport dining and retail tenants, and to add the Commission Public Health and Safety Initiative Service, complimentary hygiene products at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport.
Commissioners, in 2023, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport was given the award of the cleanest airport in the United States by Skytrax. SCA was second only to Vancouver in North America in this regard. This honor is largely due to the aviation maintenance team and the service contracts we have for custodial services. The authorization will increase the value of the existing contract to reflect actual costs, add a new service to meet tenant needs, and add capacity to provide complimentary hygiene products to travelers and staff at the airport. The presenters are this afternoon Mike Tasker, Director, Aviation Maintenance, and Gina Kim, Senior Manager, Aviation Maintenance Custodial Services. So I'll begin with you, Mike. Is that?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners and Executive Director Metric. I'm Mike Tasker, Director of Aviation Maintenance, as was said. I'm here with Gina Kim, Senior Manager of Aviation Service Contract Management. We're here today to request authorization for custodial services at the airport. Slide. As was mentioned in the overview, there are multiple elements to the action requested, and we'll go through them separately. Slide. The first element of the request is to increase the authorization for additional funding. We previously came to Commission in March of 2020 and asked for $95 million in authority for custodial services in up to 4 zones to get us through 2026. This was before sending the proposals out for bid. When the proposals came back at nearly $135 million, we knew we'd return to Commission for additional authorization. This request is for an additional $54.3 million with a new total of $149.3 million. This takes the original shortfall into account and adds for inflation and new elements of this request. Slide. After bringing up the zone concept on the previous slide, it may be good to provide a brief history on the zone concept. Prior to 2017, the airport was serviced by one custodial service provider. The zone concept was presented to enhance customer service, boost competition between contractors, increase WIMBY participation, leverage labor harmony, and create jobs with living wages. The number of contracted workers in 2017 was 165, and today it's almost double at 320. There are currently 5 zones. IAF was the Zone 5, you see there in purple, that was added in 2020. Zone 1 is the south side of the secure side of the airport. Zone 2 is the north side of the secure side of the airport to include Central Terminal. Zone 3 is the non-secure part of the terminal. And Zone 4 is the non-public facing parts of the airport and airport properties to include Airport Operation Building. Slide. The second element is to recompete up to 2 custodial service contracts. One zone must be recompeted as it's done, and the other zone is at the end of its base term and could be recompeted. These contracts are performance-based. Slide. We use several elements to evaluate performance. We evaluate response times and completion of work. We leverage Maximo for tracking the data. Port staff performs VOC audits, which is a review of the spaces and evaluate their cleanliness. Training is performed with the staff to try to have consistency in evaluation. And there is an incentive for the contracts. If they score greater than 80%, there is incentives for high levels of performance. Slide. Customers can also generate service requests at the restroom via Optico, which is leveraging technology, which is a QR code at the restroom entrance, or use a CSA app, which is a text or QR code that is provided on the restroom mirrors. Optico can also provide time from when the last cleaning and servicing of the restroom was accomplished. ACI, or Airports Council International, also performs inspections for the airport service quality quarterly. Restrooms play a big role in the airport service quality, and as was mentioned, we are proud to have been selected the best airport in North America in 2022 and 2023, cleanest airport in 2022, and we're second in 2023. Slide. The third element of this request has a lot of interest, from here, I believe, in the Commission. This third element is the request to implement the Commission Public Health and Safety Initiative. This will provide hygiene products in the public restrooms at the airport in 2024 and going forward. Slide, please. The fourth and last element of this request is to provide contracting authority for airport dining and retail waste removal. This is just a request for contracting authority, as the cost will be reimbursed by the tenants. The intent here is to mitigate waste contamination, FOD, increase environmental stewardship, efficiency, and customer experience. Sometimes they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. If you look at the pictures on the slide, this is what we can manage or deal with, frequently at the airport. And we believe we can address that by having a contracted service. Slide. And with that, it's questions.
Any questions? It's actually a little stale. Any questions? Commissioner Hazakog.
I'm beside myself about this request. I did not know that Sea-Tac Airport was recognized as the cleanest airport 2022 and the second cleanest in 2023. hygiene and making sure that we're promoting public health is a core component of what we do to maximize the customer experience, but also make sure that we have optimal workforce conditions for our thousands of employees at SEA. We are more than tripling, well, not more than, we're almost tripling the contract or the investment that we're making into hygiene at Sea-Tac Airport, including new contracts as well as an ability to implement the commission initiative to make available period products to the public and to the workers for free. This is actually a very, I think socially speaking, a huge step forward and what we're able to do today collectively at the Port of Seattle. And it's been a long time coming, for years. Thank you so much to the Port of Seattle staff, and thank you so much to my colleagues upon the commission for providing the guidance and the support in order to bring us to where we are today. I wholeheartedly look forward to supporting this.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Hasegawa. Any other questions? Real quickly, I had heard that there was a budget shortfall for 2023, and is that covered in this?
We can get through 2023 and get to early 2024 out of the authorization. We have budget. It's the authority that we're going to run out of early next year if this isn't approved.
Okay, so the current contractors that we have on for custodial services will at the very least see out the remainder of the year.
Yes.
And that's not necessarily impacted by this.
No.
And so in 2024, you may or may not rebid those custodial contracts or choose to execute on the 1 year. Is it the 1 year options or what? How?
We have 1 year options, so there's a base contract or 2 years. So one contract needs to be rebid, Zone 3, and the other one is up for, the base bid is over, and then we can evaluate the performance and have the ability to recompete. It doesn't mean we will, but we'd like an opportunity, with the authorization to recompete.
Okay. And Zone 3 is different from the new Zone 3, or are those the same?
Zone 3 is the same one there. It's just,
Oh.
it's up for competition.
Oh, I see. 'Cause I was looking at this and there was 2 Zone 3s. Got it.
Right.
Okay. All right. Seeing no further questions, is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Excellent. So, great. Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you. Commissioner Fellman?
Aye.
Commissioner Hasegawa?
Aye.
Commissioner Mohammed?
Aye.
And Commissioner Cho?
Aye.
That's 4 ayes and 0 nays for this item.
Thank you. The motion passes. Thanks, team. Appreciate it. All right. Moving on in the agenda. Clerk Payne, please go ahead and read the next item into the record, and Executive Director will introduce it.
Thank you. This is item 10F, authorization for the Executive Director to advertise, award, and execute a major works construction contract utilizing a project labor agreement to enable construction of a package of improvements to the Fisherman's Terminal, including the renovation of the ship supply building into the Maritime Innovation Center and a set of public space improvements to Fisherman's Terminal for a total amount requested of $27,415,415 and a total project authorization of $32,600,000.
Commissioners, I'm pleased to introduce this item authorizing the construction of the Maritime Innovation Center and other improvements to Fisherman's Terminal today. The investment in the Maritime Innovation Center is an example of our port-wide commitment to innovation and entrepreneurship. With the Maritime Innovation Center, or the MIC, we take the oldest building at Fisherman's Terminal and make it new with a cutting-edge design that fully reveals the 100-year-old beams inside, as well as the living building standard sustainability improvements. This project takes a humble and industrial building and remakes it for a new era. This investment is an embodiment of our positive and future-focused outlook on the maritime industries. It takes those our legacy programs and takes them into the future in driving into the newer blue economy. This authorization also includes a package of public space improvements which include art, signage, wayfinding, landscaping, and new interpretive signage at Fisherman's Terminal. The presenters are this afternoon Dave McFadden, Managing Director, Economic Development Division, Kara Lease, Director of
Real Estate Development and Economic Development, and Kelly Purnell, Capital Project Manager for Waterfront. And so with that, I'll turn over to Dave McFadden.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners and Executive Director Metric. We're pleased to be here today. I'm not sure with this project that we're at the top of the mountain, but I think we can certainly see the summit, and that is exciting. We're seeking your, let's go to the next slide, please. We're seeking your authorization to rebuild the historic ship supply building and transform it into a state-of-the-art modern maritime innovation center. We're also seeking authorization to develop wayfinding signage and interpretive displays that will complement our renovations at Fisherman's Terminal and help tell the story behind this living legacy. This facility will be a spark that ignites innovation within the maritime industry, and this spark will grow into a fire that helps sustain this vital industry into the future. The ROI on this facility cannot be measured in rent alone. The Maritime Innovation Center is more than a building. It's the heart of a new network supporting maritime entrepreneurs. This facility over time will help hundreds of entrepreneurs and ideas move forward that help sustain the port and our maritime industry. It will also advance workforce development, acting as a center of discovery for kids curious about careers in the maritime industry. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide. Our journey really on this project, as Joshua mentioned, began 7 years ago as we were finalizing a new strategic plan at Fisherman's Terminal. As this plan was getting finalized, we envisioned creating a maritime incubator at Fisherman's Terminal. We then saw an opportunity to redevelop the ship supply building into this facility. The seed was planted at this point, but we have had to do tremendous work to bring this project to fruition. Over the past 7 years, we've completed feasibility studies, written business plans, engaged countless maritime and community stakeholders, built a relationship with Maritime Blue, spawned a new maritime accelerator program, and done tremendous design work to make this facility uniquely sustainable. Let's go to the next slide. We were further spurred to action when one of our studies showed that there were over 60 incubator and accelerator programs in the Seattle region, but none of them were focused on maritime. During this time, we discovered a couple bright local maritime entrepreneurs that had flown halfway around the world to attend the Port of Rotterdam's accelerator program. One of those firms indicated that they had started in a Seattle accelerator, but got discouraged when program directors told them to shift their focus from maritime to healthcare. Now, years later, we've shown that if we build this facility, that will indeed attract the entrepreneurs and experts alike that can drive success within the maritime industry. This is a huge stride. It's an exciting day, and again, I want to thank you as the Port Commissioners. We've appreciated your support, but also your questions and drive to dig deeper on this project. But also want to commend Port staff, Maritime Blue, and numerous stakeholders for getting us to this point. And at this point, what I'd like to do is turn it over to my associates, Kira Lees and Kelly Purnell, who will go over key project details.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Commissioners. It is a real pleasure to be here with you and present this project for your approval. Before I begin, I too want to acknowledge that between myself and Project Manager Purnell, we represent just 2 of the countless hands and hearts from across the port over the last 7 years that have been part of the project team to deliver this set of projects. First, in the effort to develop a comprehensive vision and plan for Fisherman's Terminal, and then taking the steps to set a design framework that has yielded the projects we're here today to discuss. The Maritime Innovation Center, purpose-built for the maritime industry, and showcasing our commitment to the future of the people who make up Fisherman's Terminal and the maritime industry. So let me go over a few elements of design and construction of this amazing project. Next slide, please. The ship supply building has been at this spot on the docks of FT for 105 years. The key principle of our design approach is that the footprint and envelope of this building will remain just where it's been for all of those 105 years. The building will be completely renovated, using existing beams and including new glass exterior doors and windows to enhance the transparency, incorporate natural light and fresh air, one of the elements that's required as part of Living Building Challenge certification. We are incorporating an exciting design gesture, the 105-year-old wood beams in our final design, with the addition of steel beams to support seismic engineering requirements of a contemporary project. The significant challenges of design are in the foundation system, poor soil conditions, and the fact that the building is supported on piles, which themselves are from a century ago, and the fact that in order to replace the piles, we need to basically pick the building up and put it in the parking lot next to it while we fix the piles. That just outlines just one of the many challenges we faced in a design on the existing footprint to a contemporary standard. Next slide, please. Construction will be complicated. And a bit later in this presentation, Kelly will discuss how we've worked through and planned for some of those complications we've anticipated and mitigated the risks. Construction will commence with abatement of regulated materials in the existing structure and some selective demolition in the interior, taking care to protect those timber structures which will be preserved in the final product. The foundation system, namely the new structural piles that the building foundation will eventually rest on, will take particular care during the construction period, after which the building will be fully rehabilitated, first with our work on core and shell, and then finally with tenant improvements to support maritime blue. It includes new utility service, new building perimeter, and parking. It sounds straightforward, but it's not. We have been talking to potential general contractors about this project ahead of building to confirm our assumptions in a pre-bid environment, just one step we are taking to reduce risk overall. And again, Kelly will talk more about our risk management approach when she makes her budget comments a bit later. Next slide, please. As you've heard, the sustainability approach in our design is to achieve Living Building Standards certification in this project. Many of you have worked with LEED and other certifications that set green building standards in the U.S. The Living Futures Institute developed LBC standards, which significantly works with biophilic design principles, or the practice of reconnecting people and nature within the built environment. Biophilic design involves translating elements derived from nature into design outcomes and ultimately improve the health and well-being of occupants and foster a connection to nature. Nonetheless, the Port's Sustainable Evaluation Framework selected Maritime Innovation Center as a pilot project for our sustainability policy, and we work closely with the environmental team to look at options into building design in light of our desire to be the greenest port in North America. As you see in this graphic, which many of you have seen many times, there are many facets to this construction that advance our priorities around sustainability. Some things most are familiar with: photovoltaic panels, ground source heat exchange, the treatment of wastewater on site. In addition, there are red list materials that will be prohibited in construction. The project is net positive for energy, and with our salvage approach, reduce carbon emissions and carbon capture over the life of the operating facility. Unlike some of the more technical provisos in the LBC framework, LBC also requires heightened equity commitments for design and engagement in construction and in terms of the workforce contracted for this project, among many other requirements. Next slide, please. The Maritime Innovation Center and the surrounding public project also includes art. Working with the art team, Tommy Gregory and Annabelle Goevic, who solicited artists to work with the project team, we're happy to be working with local artists Shogo Oda and Tai Juvenile. These sketches are the preliminary concepts they've provided, will be incorporated as permanent features into the final design, with the likelihood that Mr. Oda's graphic will be incorporated onto the exterior of Netshed 3, while Tai's piece will be on the MIG itself. Next slide, please. In addition to construction of the Maritime Innovation Center, we have this set of public space improvements designed to enhance the public experience of Fisherman's Terminal and provide significant updates to wayfinding signage, landscaping, and an update and overhaul of all of the existing interpretive signage program at Fisherman's Terminal. Next slide, please. This slide gives you just an overview of where the site improvement project locations are at FT. And will be, generally speaking, at the scale of a pedestrian-oriented set of improvements with enhanced ADA compliance as well. Next slide, please. As part of our commitment to equity and community engagement, we also took the opportunity this project represented to update the content of interpretive signage at FT to complement the new, more engaging signage design. Last year, working with a team from OEDI and External Relations and consulting with Headwater people to ensure we have a strong awareness of the Native experience in our place here, we hired a public historian, Sharon Boswell, and engaged a panel of fishers and professionals from a number of cultural institutions to advise us on the project, including the Nordic Heritage Center, Mohai, Burke Museum, that all helped Sharon to develop new contemporary content for this history recounted in these panels. The result will be a more complete and comprehensive appreciation of the communities and people of FT, as well as the industries and experience that have made Fisherman's Terminal central to the history of Puget Sound and the livelihood of fishers throughout the region for over 100 years. Next slide, please. This outline is just one way that we are looking at the past in these panels, highlighting both heritage and ecology, industry, and community history, even looking at things like boat types and fishing species that have been important at FT. Now I want to turn the presentation over to Project Manager Kelly Purnell, who will walk you through our budgets for this project and some important risk mitigation aspects of our financial approach. I do want to remind folks that the Department of Commerce gave $5 million to the construction of this project, so that will also be part of the funds for the project. Kelly.
All right, I'm not sure if this one is working. Let me steal that one. Thank you. Next slide. All right, as you can see, our estimated total project costs for the Maritime Innovation Center are $29.4 million. I provided a breakdown here for you to look at. I would also like to speak a little bit more to the construction mitigation costs that you see in line 2 there. So if you go to the next slide, please. I provided a breakdown of the contingencies that we have allocated for this project. We call them extraordinary risk mitigation costs because they are somewhat above and beyond what we would usually carry. As Kira discussed earlier on slide 7, for reference, we have significant proposed building improvements for the Maritime Innovation Center as well as challenges, as the building is over 100 years old. We have abatement of regulated materials, which we've done extensive survey of the building and have identified most of the regulated materials, but there is a possibility that we'll find more. Currently, we have port construction services scheduled to abate most of it in advance, so we should know early on. As Kira mentioned as well, the timber framing is original. It's old growth wood that is both structural as well as providing rustic aesthetic components to the building. The timber framing will be heavily reinforced with modern steel framing that will enhance the structural stability of the building. The timber framing will also help to preserve the original historic character of the building, and it ties to the living building challenge imperatives of reusing original materials. It also ties directly to one of our most important features of the project, which is the new deep-driven steel pile foundation for the building. This is necessary to seismically stabilize the building due to the liquefiable soils located at the site. It also carries some of the largest risk in that we must move the building. I mention these specific components of the project scope because a great deal of work has gone into identifying risks associated with renovating this historic building. During the project design phase, we held 2 intensive risk analysis workshops. These analyses and subsequent statistical modeling have allowed us to better understand that this particular project has significant risk with potentially large cost and schedule impacts. We also held many individual contractor information sessions, as Kira mentioned, which further highlighted known and unknown challenges that we needed to address. Some of these risks are known, but unable to be fully quantified until construction is underway. As Kira discussed earlier, whoops, sorry, turn the page. As is the case with many port waterfront properties, the soils at Fisherman's Terminal are of poor quality due to old fill on top of tidelands. We have done many advanced studies for the foundation analysis, environmental considerations, hazardous materials, and constructability. These have informed how we will address our risks, but we need to know that we need to be prepared for the unknown. Additionally, the project is operationally constrained both in our lack of physical space and day-to-day and seasonal operations for the commercial fishing fleet. Therefore, we have structured our construction budget with enhanced contingencies to account for the impactful potential on risk potential on this project. We're carrying an additional 10% above our typical in our contingency funding. We are carrying extra funding for hazardous material removal above and beyond that which is currently identified in case they are found during the demolition. We're also carrying funds set aside specifically for the contractor to use for site verification in advance of beginning construction to address issues that may arise after they have determined their best means and methods of the construction. And lastly, we are carrying additional funds for site-specific security, given the high likelihood of break-ins and theft at the construction site. This will provide a port security guard during all non-construction hours. Next slide. Here's a continuation of our project cost estimates specific to our public site improvements component of the overall project, including the pedestrian bike improvements, interpretive signage, public art, among others. Our next slide. Here's our overall schedule for the project. Currently, our project has finished our 100% design, and we are putting the finishing touches on our bid set. Pending the issuance of our construction permit, which we anticipate this month, we intend to advertise the project at the end of August or early September, with contract execution in November. We have a long submittal period, which we have set aside to be used for the contractor, both their submittals and for site verification. This is part of our risk mitigation strategy. Construction is anticipated to begin in May of 2024 with substantial completion in the Q3 of 2025. This will be followed by a 12-month Living Building Challenge certification period and then close out. Next slide. Open up the questions.
All right.
Thank you.
Questions from commissioners? All right, Commissioner Fred.
Well, thanks so much. What an exciting project. And I've had the pleasure of snooping around inside the dusty building back with Commissioner Steinbrook in the day. And we love the bones and looking forward to seeing them come back to life. It's really a spectacular thing. And the mission of the building is, you know, what's not to like. Having the chance to go to Norway a couple times and seeing these sort of innovation centers, this is a great thing. So clearly the ROI on something like this cannot be measured on something like whatever it's $1,600 a square foot. That's going to take a little while to get back in. But you're saying it's something like $550,000 a year would be generated in approximately. That's what you're shooting for?
I'm not working on the income side of that yet.
Fred, I don't believe we have arrived at a price through any negotiations. That we haven't started that.
I saw something here.
There is maybe a note in the memo back under financial return that pegs income. I'm not sure we actually put that in there.
I pulled it from someplace, but with this pedal certification, I would assume there's going to be some unanticipated O&M efforts to keep something like this innovative. I remember when the Bullitt Center opened up originally, the sanitation system wasn't exactly up to spec, so
the mulching
I was there for that. But not specifically, but yeah.
Significantly smaller project, same architect, Miller Hall, and the service they've provided in guiding us through the elements of the LBC, very impressed with it. So they're on our side. I think they're here today to help walk us through some of that. Many features. There are features material to the project. There are also things like we need a community garden element that we've got to locate. So there's a lot of unusual features in LBC in there.
Well, it's great that we have them to, a lot has gone on since that building was built, so we'll have a lot of lessons learned from that period of time. But, you know, the last time we were, as a commission, fully briefed on this, I guess, was in November 22, based on the briefing memo here. So, you know, I have several questions to ask. It's not a reflection of my lack of interest in the project, but I didn't have a chance to, some of the graphics I've seen here are new to me. I mean, so, first time seeing them, it's an exciting thing I would just definitely want to ask a little bit more about. One of the things that I know that's unique about the building is that it's within the shoreline. And you can't build this height of a building this close to shore. But it's not exactly a shoreline-dependent use. So I'm just wondering, it seems to me that we're going through some heroics/expense to be able to put it back within the 200-foot zone.
Correct.
And so I assume it's probably already like a 100-foot setback, at least, something like that.
So, you know, the preservation of the footprint was a key design element of the project. I mentioned it in our comments, and it does protect the full building envelope, as you suggest. We couldn't build such a building today, even with the setback. So we worked very hard, very assiduously, to figure out how to make this work in that footprint. And really the biggest challenge is those piles underneath, that poor soil condition. So most of our design ingenuity went into the foundation system. And I think I might have forgotten if you had a specific question. I'm going to.
Oh, so setting the building back 200 feet wouldn't have, well, it wouldn't work because of?
We would no longer kind of have the ground to do that in. I think the project was anticipated as, I think we had a couple of choices in the early strategies, maybe just take the building down, build a new building in its place. But the framework, literally that envelope, that building envelope so close to the edge of the dock, it was the ship supply building. Its former use was a chancellery. They were selling materials to the fishers, sort of like a department store for fishers. And we wanted that continuity of the project. So it really wasn't seriously considered to move it back into the.
All right, but you're moving it into a parking lot and bringing it back to the site. And so I was just wondering, isn't it somewhat less heroic to go back a couple hundred feet rather than hauling an old rickety building across the way? I just don't understand why needing to be in the water, because if it wasn't in the footprint, in the shoreline, I'm just wondering, wouldn't that have been a big cost savings?
Conceivably, we looked at the permit from the standpoint of the shoreline preservation and the opportunity to preserve the building. So we didn't seriously consider moving it back for a cost differential.
All right, so, I mean, again, it's not like we are launching a boat from it. Again, I haven't had a chance to really, to dig into that. I guess one of the questions, I know the security is always a concern. I mean, you're talking about paying for a person. I assume we're going to put cameras up and things like this? Is that part of the?
Yeah, that's part of the standard, is to have cameras, fencing, that's all part of it. But the bigger concern that continued to come up during our risk mitigation conversations was that during the off-construction hours, so night times, weekends, whenever our contractors weren't there, we only had a single security guard that patrols 3 properties. And so we had large gaps in when a security guard would be available. And potentially would not be able to have a response in time to prevent any theft or break-ins or property damage. So ultimately what came out of those discussions was that we needed to provide a port security guard, and we can do it.
Okay, in addition to camera gear and all that other fun stuff. All right, last question. As a member of the art board, this has been an evolving question about how we have the maritime and the aviation programs going together. I know it's a work in progress, and this thing has been going on for a while. So I just have a couple of questions about this. So at $32 million for the estimated project cost, At a 1% for art, we have $320,000. You see how I'm like that, right?
Oh, wow.
And the actual art piece that is, in fact, I think it's fantastic. The native artist is actually Tulalip, right? So it's not just a tribal guy, he's a Washingtonian. We love this. And the piece looks beautiful. And it looks, I think it would look really great on the blade of a propeller. But anyway, other than that, you look at the shape, beautiful. So, but tell me, of the 320, is that all going into the art program, or are we creating some fund, or how is that working?
Yeah, do you want to answer the budget part?
Yeah, for the budget part of it. So originally, because the budget has changed, the two contracts that we currently have right now is actually only for $147,000. And then we've got another 50 that we've allocated for site improvements art. So we have additional money that we can do something else with, whether it's going into a fund or for additional art.
Yeah, I think only thing I'd add, we could either do more art right at the Mink, or we could do it in an other area of FT, if we'd like.
So I'm, it's just a question. So 140 of the 320, we know what we're doing with.
Plus the 50 for the additional site improvements art that we're.
And we don't have a cost estimate yet for the installation fully, right? We've got the concept drawings.
Got the concept drawings, but the contract itself is 147,
Yeah.
so it includes.
So that would be inclusive. So, and this 50 million, this is, I was told, it's sort of like a different sum. Is this like something that has to be spent this year? Is that what, is there anything, or is it all from the same 1% pot?
I think that I understand, well, maybe Dave should answer this one, but you have the 1% that is derived from our capital project that's available to spend on art. We put an RFP out to get the arts component that we do. We've got another RFI out on the public space improvement art, so there will be that to come along.
Okay, so
I
could you
believe the
distinguish that for me?
opportunity exists to put the rest of the balance into the art pool.
What is that difference between, what is the 50,000 you said, public
The
space?
50,000, so we have the two aspects of this project. We have the construction of the Maritime Innovation Center, one capital project, and then we have the public space improvements, the signage and landscaping and so forth. That's large enough for a 1% for art investment as well, so that's got a complement of art.
So that art would be separate from the actual signage, but part
Somehow
of the.
related to it.
Integrated into the walkways and stuff.
That's right.
You're exactly
Fantastic.
right.
Look
We've talked
forward
about
to having this.
pavers and things like that.
Look forward to having the further conversation with the art board and all that as this evolves. Very exciting project. Looking forward to seeing it breaking ground. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Any other questions from commissioners? I have a really quick question. Does this project, and I'm not talking about during construction, but in general, affect the operability and or functionality of Fisherman's Terminal?
Exceptionally good question. So we have taken pains to develop a communication strategy with an external consultant and involving our entire operating team to some extent to make sure that we understand the complement of operating not only the operations of Fisherman's Terminal, but construction projects and significantly events. We have the Homecoming of the Fleet, we've got the Fall Festival, we've got a number of other community events that we don't want to not do. So we've got a comprehensive communication strategy working with the external relations team and our outside consultant to make sure that everybody is informed of the schedules, if there's delays, emergencies, and so forth, just really to protect the integrity of the operating paradigm at Fisherman's Terminal during construction.
Great, and I appreciate that, and I think you know where that question came from. I think there's a lot of concern from those who work in the industry over this project. They work within constrained environments to begin with, and then for us to make a huge investment in a real estate property that's not arguably being used for, fishing or commercial fishing activities is a concern to the community. So I appreciate that you've thought of that and have a communication strategy in plan. So. With that, yeah.
So the other discussion was always about community gathering space and whether or not this building would be able to serve the community at the Fisherman's Terminal in addition to the innovators from around the world. And from what, I remember Dave, you telling me, and I think this is a really important part of the story, that you're also looking at developing the Nordy Center?
That's right.
And so could you just, because I think that's important for folks to hear as well.
I really don't think that's relevant to this project, and so.
Well, it's
we could
directly
just-
relevant because we're taking away potential space that would be,
Can
to
you
your
make it quick,
point.
Dave, please?
Yeah, sure. The MINC, the Maritime Innovation Center, will be available for meetings that are focused on the industry, maritime industry, fishing industry. So yes, it is available. And what Fred's really alluding to is also, as we develop MINC, we are doubling the size of the Nordby conference room. So we're actually providing more resources for folks that want to get together than we've had even before we started the MINC.
Can I get a motion and a second on this item, please?
So moved.
Second?
All right, Clerk Payne, please go ahead and call the roll.
Thank you. Commissioner Fellman,
Aye.
Commissioner Hasagawa,
Aye.
Commissioner Mohammed,
Aye.
and Commissioner Cho.
Aye.
There are 4 ayes and 0 nays for this item.
Excellent, the motion passes. Thank you very much. All right, moving, that takes care of all our new business. Moving on to item 11, presentations and staff reports. Deputy Clerk Payne, please read the next item into the record, and Executive Director Metric will then introduce it.
Thank you. This is item 11A, Q2 2023 Financial Performance Briefing.
Commissioners, I'm happy to report that the 2023 financial performance results for the first half of the year were strong. SCA passenger volumes continue to rebound and are expected to be 8.8% higher than 2022 and 3.4% lower than pre-pandemic volumes in 2019. Airport non-aeronautical revenues are performing better than the budget. We expect another robust year for our cruise business with a projected 287 sailings and a record 1.4 million revenue passengers. As a reminder, each home-ported vessel brings in over $4 million to the local economy. While our grain terminal and conference center are performing below budget, our projections, our fishing, commercial, and recreational marinas and maritime portfolio are expected to exceed revenue targets this year. Overall, we expect strong financial performance results for the year, which sets us up nicely as we build the budget towards 2024. While our performance is strong, I want to reiterate my message from previous budget discussions about the need to be fiscally responsible or fiscally strategic in what we're doing. Although we have benefited greatly from a strong recovery of travel and tourism over the past several years post-COVID, there's significant uncertainty on the horizon, particularly related to planning for costs related to environmental remediation and, of course, inflation. So presenting this afternoon, we have Dan Thomas, Chief Financial Officer, and Robert Jacopetti, Aviation Grants Program Manager. So with that, I turn over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Steve, and good afternoon, Commissioners. We'll also have Michael Tong
Oh,
and Kelly
yeah, I see
Zupan will
Michael
be
Tong.
joining us as well. I'm just going to kick off also with just a few highlights. Steve mentioned a few of the operating and financial highlights for the year. But just wanted to note, one thing that's on this first slide is at this point through second quarter, operating expenses are nearly $16 million below budget, and through second quarter, and are expected to be $5 million under budget by year end. We'll highlight some more of that later in the presentation. And on the revenue side, through second quarter, revenues are $8.3 million over budget, and by year end are forecasted to be $18 million over budget. So again, we're forecasting pretty strong performance for the year. And importantly, on the capital spending side, we are now forecasting for the year to spend just over $500 million, and that represents 93.5% of the budget for this year. And that really is noteworthy because our normal completion rate and spending rate tends to be sometimes in the 70 to 80% range. So 93.5% is really, really good, and we're hoping that can hold through the end of the year. You also have a full report in your packet, the multi-page detailed financial report, just to mention that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Robert to highlight the airport performance.
Thank you, Dan. Commissioners, thank you very much. I'm here on behalf of Heidi Papachuk to present the Aviation Division's Q2 financial results. This might move along more swiftly if I just remind you really quickly of our key performance, our goals, which is year-end cash balance, debt service coverage, coming in on or slightly under budget, and improving the airport's NOI. And I'm happy to report that we are on target to meet all of those. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this chart, I want you to focus on the right here, which has the passengers in millions. And we're clawing our way back to 2019 levels. If you look at the bottom row there, the 2023 forecast is 50 million annual passengers, which is only 3.4% lower than 2019, our sort of baseline. And we're optimistic that by 2024 we'll be back. As you know, passenger growth is key to our non-aero revenue, and which is key to our NOI. So on the next slide, you will see right in the revenue section under non-aeronautic revenue, we are better than budget by $21 million. So we're quite pleased about that. It's take us towards our goal. And if you look at our NOI, you can see we're $23 million better than, again, than budget. So with regard to O&M expenses, we're coming in slightly under budget, which is good news. And, you know, as you know, the aeronautic revenues are cost recovery, so that's why those are down. Down below, we have our key measures, non-aero NOI, we just mentioned, CPE, again, better than budget, and debt service coverage coming in better than we anticipated or budgeted. Next slide, please. So on our operating expenses, again, coming in under budget, year-to-date, $10.4 million, primarily driven by outside services. One of the biggest drivers is our some delays in some expense projects, airline realignment being the most significant. Next slide. And our full year forecast is that we come in under 1.8 million. We don't want to come in too low. Might mean that we didn't do something we promised. So this is our sweet spot. Okay. Next slide. Okay. On aeronautic revenues, again, correlates highly with operating expenses. We expect to come in slightly under budget. Next slide. Okay. This is, and I'm moving quite quickly because I'm sure everyone's kind of tired. The non-aero revenue growth, you can see it's very, very strong. It's higher than budget. It's at $12.68 per employment, which is actually stronger than 2019, $10.40 per employment. So we're doing really strong. Next slide. This breaks out that non-aeronautic revenue a little bit more granularly, where you can see by the various, not cost centers, but revenue centers. Public parkings are strongest. We've discussed before, you know, parking rate increase is primarily driving that. Okay. Next slide. Are there any questions on this slide? If I move forward?
We'll wait till the end.
Okay.
We'll wait till the end.
Next slide, please. Okay, here's our federal relief DOE summary, I'm sorry, grant summary. And so this hasn't changed from the last presentation.
I think we should make that the technical term.
Yeah.
Federal DOE
Sorry
summary.
about that.
I like that.
What I was thinking. All right, so debt service ratio, referenced earlier on, again, coming in better than budget. You know, when you take down the non-airline revenue increase, coming down all the way to what we have available for debt service, almost 369 million. And then what our actual debt service is, 312 million. You know, that leaves a cover ratio of 2.04, which makes the investment community quite happy. So we are in very good financial condition. Next slide. Okay. Again, referenced up front regarding our cash balance being one of our key goals. We are looking to come in $11 million over our target. Next slide. And the executive director had mentioned that we're doing really well, and Dan, on our capital spending. We are within 94% of budget, so we are getting things accomplished. Okay. And that's all I have. Available for questions after the presentation.
Yeah, I think there's a question amongst all commissioners when we talk about the revenues. What is the others category? It's a pretty big chunk.
I knew you would. Which slide are you on?
Well,
10?
We can start at 10. Yeah, I'm looking at the
Yeah.
briefing memo, and that doesn't
Sure.
specify.
Okay. Slide 10.
It's always fun when it's the biggest one.
Non-arrow, yeah. So that is, okay, so you have, in that bucket, you have our flight kitchen, which is really strong. We have our clubs and lounges.
Oh, I see.
And some commercial properties as well, yeah. Those are some of the biggest buckets.
So convert, also on the spending side, I think this is what you're getting at. On the spending side, what is the others category?
On the spending side.
On slide 14?
Slide 14. Let's see here. This is the, in the capital slide. Yeah, if you could jump to page, or those are all outlined in the appendix on, which is on, yeah, page 49.
49, you said?
Yeah. Yeah, we list out only those mega projects.
It's a rollout of, a roll-up of all the projects, which is like, there's over 100, right? There's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Any other questions on aviation? If not, we'll move on to Seaport.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. We will now quickly run through the first half financial performance for the Seaport at a high level, including Maritime and Economic Development divisions, along with Stormwater Utility and our position in the joint venture with Seaport, Northwest Seaport Alliance. We will go through 9 slides, answer any questions you may have. If you want a deeper look at individual businesses or service groups, there are a number of detailed slides in the appendix as well. Next slide. This slide of key metrics really tells the first half of the story. As Executive Director Metric mentioned, we maintain excellent occupancy rates in cruise and at our marinas, fishing, and commercial terminals. These were offset by some challenges pertaining to lower cargo volumes at the Seaport Alliance and at the grain terminal. The next slide, please. Here is a roll-up of the Seaport divisions. Our year-to-date net operating income is higher than budget by just under $7 million, but we are anticipating finishing the year closer to $3 million above budget, as we often get an uptick in spending in the second half of the year. Next slide, please. Now we will walk through the individual divisions, starting with Maritime. We are planning to exceed our revenue budget by approximately $1.7 million, with cruise occupancy offset by lower first half demand and grain volumes from China. The fishing and recreational marinas are performing well, particularly Terminal 91, as they have added several events, including the return of the row auction, which brought buyers from Asia to bid on pollock skeins. We expect to ramp up capital spending in the second half of the year as we move more projects into the construction stage. Many were presented today. Additionally, we saw over 2,100 chum counted as a result of the habitat improvements at Terminal 117 or the Duwamish River Peoples Park. Next slide, please. Year-to-date net operating income is $3.7 million favorable to budget and $1.4 million better than 2022. The revenues are up 13% in 2023 from a 4.2 million increase in cruise, with growth in our fishing and commercial and marinas revenue offset by revenue and grain volumes. Expenses are up from 2022 by 9%, primarily from payroll and general inflation. Again, capital spending is expected to tick up in the second half of the year as more projects move to construction. Next slide, please. Stormwater utility is coming in as planned to budget. The maintenance, central service, and central services variances are a result of about $450,000 in expenses misapplied to the wrong category. Absent that, both are right on budget. Next slide, please. Stop me if I'm going too fast. This is a breakdown of the Northwest Seaport Alliance operating results. Revenues are below budget by $3.8 million, driven by lower volumes, with expenses lower than budget due to timing of maintenance projects and volume-related cost. They're forecasted to end of the year near budget. These year-to-date operating income numbers netted to $64.3 million, coupled with $10.4 million in depreciation, amount to $53.8 million. The port gets 50% of this, along with some non-operating items such as grants that feed into $28.9 million of distributable income you will see on the next slide. Next slide, please. This slide shows the financial statement for our net stake in the joint venture, which includes that $28.9 million of distributable income from the Northwest Seaport Alliance, along with some revenues and expenses borne by the port related to Northwest Seaport Alliance licensed properties that are not included per the charter. The contra revenue is mostly related to the port's leasing 1/3 of Terminal 46. Other revenues include higher tenant reimbursements from maintenance work and unbudgeted revenue from the Pacific Crane maintenance lease on the port's portion of Terminal 46. Expenses are tracking to budget absent that $426,000 T5 environmental expense. Next slide, please. And again, next slide. The next two slides are on the Economic Development Division.
Hold on, let's pause there. Any questions on the Seaport stuff right now? Yeah, Commissioner Fred.
Commissioner Fred. So the stormwater utility you said was performing as expected, but it's down. I mean, I never, it's kind of fun that we get money from stormwater, but
sure,
minus 78% from 2022. That's what was expected?
Back to that one.
That's page 21.
Down, I mean, revenue is at 1%. And our expenses, again, I think I mentioned earlier, we typically get an uptick in expenses in the second half of the year. So we're still forecasting to budget on there.
Okay, so change from 2022 after depreciation was a change of minus 78%. Isn't that what the lower right-hand corner says?
Yeah, I mean, but that number, if you look at it in real dollars, we're talking like $200,000 overall.
All right, well, all right, that's what the, okay, so it's, all right. The other question was that, I guess it went back to, I guess it was an aviation question. So I guess this foundational thing I was talking about before was that we have all the capital stuff lumped together, and then we have the different lines of business revenues separately reported, right? So when it comes to looking at cruise, we don't really have what that net is.
Yeah, I actually did pull what that net is. So what we're planning for the year typically, here's what our 23, we're forecasting 2023 to look like for cruise. We've got $38 million approximately with $16 million in expenses. So, then we would then say net operating income of $22 million. And then we have $6 additional million of capital. So it really brings, if you include all of our investments, it would bring about $16 million of funding to the port that can be used for other items, and it kind of compensates for some of our other fishing and.
I think that's great. I mean, and it does float our boat, so to speak. And
Sure.
just, I think it's important to understand, though, that when it's not all wrapped up, I mean, it is compensating for other things, but the net for it, I think it's just good visibility. So thank you for that.
Sure, and we do show a lot of this in the appendix with the net of depreciation as well. So I just did talk about it so much in the divisional portfolios.
Great, thanks, Kelly. We can move on to Econ Dev unless
Okay.
there's questions. Nope, okay.
Was there another question?
No,
Pardon?
there's not. Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, so the next two slides are on the Economic Development Division. They are tracking to budget with the exception of some unplanned Q1 conference and event center cancellations. The Bell Street Garage is returning to pre-pandemic levels. Pier 66 elevators are at substantial completion. We are moving into the construction phase for the Maritime Innovation Center and getting closer to construction at Terminal 91 Uplands. Next slide, please. The year-to-date operating income is $750,000 favorable to budget and about $1.2 million higher than 2022. Despite the lower conference center volumes than planned, we are still over $800,000 in conference revenue higher than 2022. And coupled with increased parking volumes are up in revenue 25% year over year. Expenses are up 5% from 2022 with payroll and other inflationary increases offset by the Tourism Recovery Initiative with Washington Tourism Alliance completion in April of last year. We are expected to spend about 95% of capital budget as we ramp up Terminal 91 Uplands, World Trade Center West roof replacement, and Pier 69 underdock utility work. And that does it for Seaport. Any questions?
Great, go ahead. For Econ Dev. Yeah.
So when you talk about conference center, does that include World Trade Center? Probably not, right?
Yes, it is. It's mostly the Bell Harbor. I mean, there's some.
But
in
it
there,
does,
yeah.
because like, do you have offhand, our occupancy at World Trade?
The building?
Yeah. Well, just because, people have told me, well, why aren't you doing like, putting innovators in that space if we have room there as well? And is that, do we know if that's, like Dave's left, I guess, so.
Yeah,
Oh, no,
I
here
can
he is.
maybe get back to you on that one.
It's just it's quality space. I just know we haven't been able to rent it all.
Correct, and I would like to come back and answer that question more accurately and give you a specific occupancy. I think the struggle has been with some of the waterfront construction, pandemic, impact on office. It's been a hard space to fill, and also the spaces we have are large. They're typically in the larger block of 4,000 to 5,000 square feet. We may need, I will consult with Jennifer to determine going forward whether we need to address or change any of the space characteristics in that building, but I know efforts are still made through our broker and through our staff to try and fill those spaces.
It's just such a great building. I'm surprised that it's so hard to sell. And, well, maybe with the Elliott Way taking care of some of the traffic, who knows? But it seems like a bit of a diamond in the rough.
All right.
Commissioner, we can report back to all the commissioners on that.
All right, Central Services.
Good afternoon, Commissioner and Executive Director Metric. In the next few slides, I'm going to walk through the central services as well as the port-wide numbers for you. Next slide, please. So here's the central service number. For the year, we are expecting 244,000 operating revenues above budget. And that's mainly because of the unbudgeted police forfeitures revenue. On the expenses side, most departments will come in below budget, and we expect about $3 million below budget for the year. On the right-hand side, a few business highlight. You can actually find much more in the written report in your package. I am here to just want to highlight a few for you. The first one is we have hosted the multicultural waterfront boat tour for about 250 community members. And second one is that we also hosted the annual South King County Community Impact Fund Environment and Job Symposium with about 150 attendees. Last but not least, the port completed the Equitable Spending and Accountability Project ESAP framework, and we are using it as a pilot for the 2024 budget, and you will hear more in the next few months when we will finish the 2024 proposed budget, and we'll report those results to you. Next slide, please. This chart shows the 2023 year-to-date central services expenses compared to those in the past 2 years and to the budget. Overall, the 2023 year-to-date operating expenses are $4.9 million below budget and due to lower payroll and the outside services, and $12.2 million higher than last year, also mainly because of higher payrolls. We have the number of new FTE and with the pay increase that we have this year, and also more spending on the outside services. Next slide, please. So this chart on the left shows the year-to-date budget variance, and the chart on the right-hand side shows where those major variance came from. So while the overall payrolls were $2.6 million lower than the budget, you are seeing a number of budget variance in those three major categories: salaries, wages, and charges to capital. So one of the most noticeable budget variance came from the payroll charge to capital. As you can see from the blue line there, it's about 18% below budget. The other one I would like to highlight here is the outside services, which is $2.8 million, or about 15% under budget. So those are the two major categories that we are seeing a significant percentage in terms of the budget variance here. So these are the central service number. If you don't have any question, I will go to the port-wide numbers. But I'll pause it here.
Yeah, Commissioner Fred has a question.
So I know we always ask these stupid questions about central service because it's like some allocation of pieces of everybody gets tucked in here. But so when I look at legislation, the staff incentivization, the 2-to-1 bill matches, straight up, public affairs related things. So we're taking this, these are business highlights for central. So some portion of Pierce's time, of other folks' time that's what it is. So see, I knew the answer to the question, but if you took all of these, your highlights, and how much is all that really? Those are things that we are very proud of and things like that, but it's probably a small piece of overall the budget for central services, isn't it?
That's probably true in terms of the budget amount, but the business highlight is more on the impact and some of the outreach that we engage the community.
Right. So, yeah. But if we just look at the, obviously police and engineering and core essential, these are the big ticket items. So I'm just, a lot of these are commission initiatives and important things to our communities and things like that. But I just would be interested to know in the context of the overall central services budget. This seems like probably rounding error.
That's probably true. A big portion of that, we have several large departments, as you know, the police is the biggest one, but also the ICT, HR, and, accounting, and, a number of
Huge
large
things,
departments,
right?
that
Yeah,
we
yeah.
supporting Port-wide, yes.
Yeah, if I could just, I think in the future, thanks for that feedback, I think we can look at, well, what are the big budget drivers, the big ones, we can reflect those, so.
And also, I would like to point out that in the written report, there's a table that lists all those by departments and the budget amount, the actual spending amount, and the variances. Thank you.
Great. All right, we can move on to Port-wide.
Okay, next slide, or next one more, please. So here's the Port-wide numbers. We show how by major category. The blue bar is the nautical revenue, and the light is the green bar is the long airport revenue, our nautical airport long our nautical revenue, and the light blue is the long airport revenue. So you can see the three major components. And then red bar is just the operating expenses, and the blue line is the net operating income. So you can see from the chart here, basically we have a very strong recovery from the pandemic in the last couple of years. And our year-to-date actual is also performed better than the budget. So overall, we are 8.3 million above budget on the revenue side, and then also on the expenses side, 15.7 million below budget. And the net operating income before depreciation was 24 million above budget, so pretty strong result overall. Next slide, please. So for the full year, we are expecting 18.3 million above budget, and mainly due to higher our nautical revenues and cruise revenue, and possibly offset by the lower our nautical revenue at the airport, and also the grain volume of revenue there. On the expenses side, we are forecasting 5 million below budget, and linked to some vacancies and lower utilities and third-party management costs. Net operating income before depreciation is forecast to be 23 million above budget and 69 million, or about 20% above the 2022 level. So it's pretty good result overall. Next slide, please. Last but not least, just is the port-wide capital spending number. We spent about 194 million in the first half of the year, and we expect to spend about 506 million for the year. So these are the overall port-wide summary, and then again, you can see the detail in the appendix, and all the slide in the appendix, as well as the written report in your package. So with that, happy to answer any further questions that you may have.
Great. Any questions from commissioners? No? Any additional questions? So just a quick question with regards to, it seems like a lot of the savings that we're exhibiting, especially on the aviation side, is due to project delay. And so when it comes to year-over-year budgeting, do we just roll over, or do we, I'm curious from an accounting standpoint, how do we account for that? Those savings, it's not really a savings, really. It's more of a delay, right?
Yeah, if on the operating expense side, then it's 1 year by year. If it's on talking about the capital spending, then some of them, have some true saving, but lots of them, if it's because of delay, then we obviously have to finish the project and move it.
So we would obviously account for that in next year's budget.
Yeah.
Right, we would reflect that and that's why we go back to looking at, and this is why the number there, and the 95% execution of the capital budget is very important for us. It gets us closer to our budgeted spending of doing that, but it also means we're delivering those key projects as well that we have in our capital plan. And you're right, Mr. President, that delays it, it could be just sliding. There's not savings there, just sliding within that.
Okay. All right, thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, that concludes our business meeting agenda for the day. Are there any closing comments at this time, or motions relating to committee referrals for commissioners? Commissioner Hasegawa?
Thank you. I know it's going to be a bit of a recess before we reconvene in public forum as a commission in September. I just wanted to introduce the idea to commissioners, members of the public, port staff, of a potential order coming forward to establish an ad hoc committee that will address specifically workforce conditions. The purpose for me seeking to establish this sort of an ad hoc committee is to be able to advance in a streamlined fashion some of the priority items that we've been working on an ad hoc basis. That includes the issue of childcare, which is an express priority by my colleagues upon the commission, as well as the ongoing challenge of addressing the needs for health care from some of our airport workers as well. And so this would be a forum where we'll be able to receive regular and dependable updates as a committee, reported out to the full commission on a regular basis, and be able to provide input and guidance on these workforce conditions issues.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Commissioner Hasegawa. Executive Director Metric, any closing oh, yeah, Commissioner Feldman.
I just wanted to acknowledge this fantastic event we were at on the 30th at Alki when the Muckleshoot pulled off a remarkable event of 100+ canoes from all over the Northwest region, landing in incredible timing and fanfare, incredibly organized event. And it was great for the port to be there in force and show our respects.
Excellent. Thank you for being there on our behalf. Executive Director Metric, any closing comments today?
Thanks, Commissioner. I know it was a long meeting, but I think ending on the just how we're performing financially through the half the year as we go into the budget season is great, and I appreciate your time on that. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, hearing no further comments or having no further business, if there's no objection, we are adjourned right before 4 o'clock, 3:58. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.